Chapter 379. Emotional memories were often particularly deep, but they were often distorted. From Luo Nan's impression, he had taken a step back. It was a true reaction of his mind. But the analysis of this quintessential post was reasonable and convincing. This created a contradiction. Should I believe the data, or should I believe my feelings? Luo Nan believed the former for now, but he still harbored some doubts. He continued to read, hoping to find a more decisive and convincing reason. The group of braggers was exposed when they replied to this point. They had a tendency to turn back to the main topic with great difficulty, but not long after, the following comments veered off the mark. The reason was that an ID called Unchangeable Gold had sent an emoticon of someone pinching their fingers fiercely. He added 3 simple words, "I was wondering." This Unchangeable Gold was certainly a public figure. After his reply appeared, a long string of comments directly quoted the contents of his speech. It had become the center of the topic. Boss Gold has been exposed. Queen Wu, be careful of the hooligan. So that's how it is. Gold has always been like this. Boss Gold, represent headquarters in an expedition to Xia City. Most of these comments were from 3 years ago. They called out Her Majesty Empress Wu's nickname from back in the day. The atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. But this was not the most explosive point. A dozen or so messages later, a certain ID replied with the same quote from Unchangeable Gold. The content was even simpler. It was just a string of ellipses. But it was this simple symbol that caused a group of bored people to clamor as they pounced over. They replied one after another in remembrance. It was no wonder that they were not calm. The person who came later was the true source of all evil, the instigator of all evil. Wu Ming. No one knew what happened back then. The current ID of Her Majesty Empress Wu was dyed with the most distinguished purple-gold color of the society. She was the symbol of a veteran, a powerful person, and a person with real authority in the society. After she personally replied, the comments below truly exploded. One could vaguely feel the fiery atmosphere of the time from the dense overlapping of the messages. But strangely enough, there were still people who came to pay homage to this temporary hot spot. Luo Nan scrolled to the end and saw that the latter half of the replies were mostly, "Boss Gold is dead. Burn incense if you have something to do. Ambition is not far. The soul has returned. I don't believe that Boss Gold has disappeared. Sit and wait. Missing." The range of public figures who had been missing for 3 years was very small. Luo Nan subconsciously opened up Unchangeable Gold's personal page. The entire page was gray in color, but the information of his rank, position, achievements, and honor were all preserved. Looking at it this way, it was easy to understand. Back then, Director Jean was most likely a purple-gold certified person, which meant that he was the branch president, the headquarters deputy secretary, and a senior elder. Among this group of people, the strength of B class was considered low. The real ones were B+ or even a class, which was the level of extraordinaries. However, he had been missing for many years, so he must have missed the qualification certification process that was held once every 10 years. The relevant benefits were temporarily frozen, and the display of his ID had also become ordinary. Only this locked page and the old posts from back then had some traces left. Luo Nan really did seem to have heard of this before. It was most likely in bamboo poles, notes on the most important people of the world, of course. It shouldn't have been listed separately, but Luo Nan recalled that there had been an extremely famous case of extraordinaries going missing in recent years. The Maple Pavilion case. Luo Nan flipped through the information given to him by Bamboo Pole. His memories from the class became clear. This Mr. Unchangeable Gold was indeed a legendary character. Rumor had it that he was one of the first capital tycoons to strike it rich after the war. He had a net worth of hundreds of millions, but he had awakened to extraordinary powers by chance. He had been infatuated with them ever since, so much so that he had spent all of his wealth in order to take a step forward in cultivation. Perhaps the heavens had been moved by his determination to spend money, or perhaps the extraordinary powers he had awakened to were truly astonishing. He had advanced to become an extraordinaire in the 80s, becoming one of the most apex existences on the planet. After that, he resumed his old business and entered the sea of business. He opened a chain of hotels called the Maple Pavilion. He had brains and the status of an extraordinaire. He had opened hotels all over the world in a short few years, rushing to enter the top 100. His net worth was even greater than when he had first made his fortune. By now, no matter how one looked at it, this Mr. Unexchangeable Gold was a true winner in life. His experiences were wonderful and perfect. However, normal people couldn't understand the world of great experts. It was unknown what Unexchangeable Gold was thinking. He felt that it wasn't enough to open the Maple Pavilion hotels in the 88 metropolitan areas of the world. He began to operate hotels in the wilderness to do business with vagrants. In the beginning, he really did succeed in a few operations. He gained quite a bit of reputation among the vagrants. However, 3 years ago, he rushed to the wilderness to inspect a new location for his hotel. He suddenly encountered an accident and went missing. According to the results of the investigation at the time, the location where Unexchangeable Gold went missing was a mountainous area of nearly 2,000 square kilometers. The force of the impact pierced through the Earth's crust, detonating dormant volcanoes and changing the terrain. The power of an extraordinaire was terrifying, but it was useless. Those who should have gone missing had gone missing. Bamboo Pole mentioned Unexchangeable Gold during class. He wanted Luo Nan to understand that even an extraordinaire wasn't an omnipotent god. Coincidentally, the specific time of Unexchangeable Gold's disappearance and the time of his reply were 24 hours apart. These were the last traces of him in public before he left the metropolitan area and entered the wilderness. In a certain sense, these words could be considered his last words. Luo Nan finally understood the reason for the abnormal number of replies to a boring topic. In the end, it was because of this. There was clearly a closing song of a tortuous legend hidden within. Sigh. Luo Nan was no exception. He sighed and closed the analysis thread with dull interest. He didn't want to look at it for the time being. If a young man with the highest goal in life was to become an extraordinaire, he would be depressed for an entire day and night upon encountering such a thing. Luckily, Luo Nan's goal was a bit distant from this field. He adjusted himself a bit and stopped looking at the thread. There were other things he could refer to. Luo Nan hadn't looked at the handouts and notes that Papercut had sent him. He planned to spend half the afternoon to understand them. He never expected to discover that this handout actually revolved around the recording of reality after flipping it open. It was tightly integrated. There was nothing to say. Luo Nan could only activate reality and link to reading mode at the same time. He began to work hard. Of course, the handout only brushed over the first few interludes. It mainly started from the moment he discovered the pleated wild boar and entered combat mode. Sure enough, it was just as Papercut said. Her Majesty Empress Wu's personal explanation of the handout was much more detailed. It was also much more profound than the elite replies seen online. In the morning, Luo Nan used a mere 2 hours to train the condensation ring to a certain level. Because of this, he had some doubts about the technical difficulty and actual combat power of the entire dripping sword. But when Luo Nan saw the handouts personally produced by Her Majesty Empress Wu, he had to reflect on his own shallow understanding. Not only did Her Majesty Empress Wu give a thorough analysis of the condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures, she also mentioned many of the thoughts she had when making the video. She also added many application techniques, touching upon all kinds of combat environments, unexpected situations, variations of techniques, and so on. From what Luo Nan could sense, Her Majesty Empress Wu used the condensation ring as a foundation. She could add or subtract auxiliary structures at will. She could even add or subtract the condensation ring itself. Her Majesty Empress Wu revolved around the two vitals of the enemy, the eyes and the mouth. She could transform into a dozen major categories and hundreds and thousands of killing techniques. Luo Nan didn't quite understand the other categories, but there was a part that involved the nervous system. Just a few words were enough to make his forehead sweat. A small water droplet, through various ways of stimulating the nerves, could achieve 7 or 8 effects such as death, hallucination, paralysis, torture, and so on. Every move was highly maneuverable, as long as one's control ability was up to standard. Such endless transformations, it was simply inconceivable. It was a pity. It was a pity that Papercut had no talent in this area and wasn't very interested. The notes he recorded were a bit superficial. It wasn't very satisfying to look at them. Luo Nan hated himself for feeling guilty last night. He just wanted to dodge He Yuan's warning. Not only did he not get the heart-searing blade video archive, he even skipped over the dripping sword. He read the handouts and notes from beginning to end, but he was not satisfied and wanted to read them again. He didn't expect to find another video at the end of the notes. It wasn't long, only 2 or 3 minutes. It was President Ouyang's concluding speech. Papercut had recorded it on the spur of the moment. At that time, there were more than 100 people sitting in the circular conference room. They were the backbone of the branch. Luo Nan looked around and found a few familiar faces. In the center of the conference room stood Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty the Martial Empress. Slightly to the side, Old Man Yu sat in a wheelchair, occupying a corner. The 3 heavyweights of Xia City appeared in unison. The standard of this intermediate training class was already top-notch. This made Luo Nan look forward to next year's spring training class even more. Generally speaking, the host's speech, the concluding speech, and the like should be relatively empty. They were heavy on flattery and had no substantive content. At first glance, Ouyang Chen's path was also like this. However, his evaluation method and focus were quite to Luo Nan's liking. This was what President Ouyang had said: 50 years have been spent on contemporary research on supernatural powers, from nothing to the current classification. In this period of time, the number of applied techniques alone has exceeded 70,000. Mud and sand have fallen, and fish and dragons are mixed together. I recognize the vast majority of these techniques, but I don't believe that they have any practical value that can be passed down for a long time. These applied techniques are either simple and crude. Some are tedious and complex. Some are profound and abstruse. There are few exceptions. In the future, we will probably only see them in museums. Through them, we can feel this era of barbaric growth. But a year ago, I saw the dripping sword released by Lady Wu. Its usage requirements aren't high, and its consumption isn't great. The vast majority of awakened on the mental side can use it. However, it isn't a simple matter to use it well, to use it fully, and to use it to a high standard. After today's lesson, I am even more convinced that this simple technique can completely squeeze out the potential of an awakened. It can exhaust the imagination of an architect. Even if one reaches the level of an extraordinary, one can still unearth valuable topics from this technique. The conference room in the video was in a bit of an uproar. Clearly, the participants were somewhat unable to accept President Ouyang's high evaluation. Ouyang Chen then gave his explanation: it looks like the dripping sword doesn't touch upon anything essential. But by relying on the 6 simple structures of the mental interfering with the material plane, it has realized far too many changes. It is like the basic material elements can form the entire world. We should also take note of the condensation ring at its most core position. It has an inconceivable possibility. On the microscopic plane, it achieves the highly efficient collection of water molecules through an extremely concise structure. It can completely replace the microscopic ability of extraordinaries. Why is it like this? I have yet to come to a conclusion, but this technique of going from simple to complex, from complex to simple, and switching between simple and complex at will is extremely mature, complete, and high level. So much so that I believe that this is the result of 100 years in advance. As far as the present stage is concerned, there is no way to increase or decrease it. There is nothing to nitpick about. As a user, I can know how it is, but I don't know why it is. But as a researcher, I must bow and pay my respects to this genius and exquisite design. Then President Ouyang really did turn around. He bowed his back toward the faintly smiling Her Majesty Empress Wu. The video ended here. Truly kick-ass. Luo Nan gave this crude praise to both Her Majesty Empress Wu and to President Ouyang. Using an imprecise expression, a water molecule had a diameter of approximately 0.4 nanometers. Even though Luo Nan's soul strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, his precision was barely able to touch the micron level. There was still quite a bit of distance from the nanometer scale. Under normal circumstances, Luo Nan did not know how long it would take for him to effectively collect water molecules by relying solely on his soul strength. But now, a tiny basic structure had accomplished this. Luo Nan was unable to figure out the mysteries within with his current level of knowledge, no matter how hard he tried. The puzzlement was hard to resolve, but it was also full of admiration. So much so that Luo Nan had a thought. It seemed that bowing to this legendary lady was not unacceptable. Another afternoon passed after Luo Nan finished reading the handouts and notes. The condensation ring gathered a small bead of water by Luo Nan's side. It was the size of a fingertip. This was already the limit of its volume. According to Her Majesty Empress Wu, Luo Nan's usage belonged to the thankless type. However, even that legendary lady would never imagine that Luo Nan possessed a production line that produced an unending stream of soul strength. When the in and the out were completely disproportionate, there was no need to measure anymore. It was fine as long as he was willful. With a slight stir of his thoughts, the bead of water he controlled was like a sword pill from a novel. It leaped and flew, coming and going freely in the room, doing as he pleased. The materialization of supernatural abilities gave him a greater sense of achievement compared to the soundless siege hammer. There was only half a day left in his closed-door cultivation. His plans could not keep up with the changes. Luo Nan's cultivation plan was far from reaching his expectations in order to clean up his mess. The dripping sword had become the most unexpected harvest. It should be firmly grasped. What? The star atlas of the format pyramid. Wouldn't that be a huge problem? In any case, Luo Nan had already developed a deep interest in the dripping sword. He even had feelings for it. Chapter 380. Luo Nan decided to press on with a spurt of energy. He grasped the 5 auxiliary structures of the dripping sword. In his opinion, this was possible. The 5 structures of amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance were all built around the condensation ring. The complexity of the structure was low, and the requirements for precision were also very limited. Especially the range increase, acceleration, and guidance. These 3 structures that increased the effects of control were just extensions of the condensation ring. Luo Nan only needed an hour to master them very well. Of course, this was partly due to the sturdiness of the condensation ring, which allowed him to practice on it again and again. He did not have to worry that the crude auxiliary structure would explode and cause him to start all over again. Luo Nan was already able to make the fingertip-sized bead of water dance up and down within the room. If he urged it with all his strength, it would be like a streak of water slicing through the air. It would only be able to see the light, but not the shadow. Then it would slap onto the wall. It was truly a tragic car accident. The 3 auxiliary structures had exploded on the spot, and the water accumulated in the condensation ring had all been left on the wall, flowing down the wall. Only the structure of the condensation ring had withstood the test. Luo Nan also knew that the room wasn't suitable for training, so he cast his gaze towards the sun-covered courtyard. The condensation ring, which was still accumulating water, was driven by Luo Nan to smash into the screen window. The screen window was breathable, but this condensation ring was already at the micron level. The fine mesh had no effect on it. After exiting the window, in just 2 seconds, the auxiliary structure and water were all replenished. Luo Nan had a good feeling as he watched the water vapor gather and scatter around the condensation ring. Controlling the bead of water to fly here and there felt even better. Without the restraints of the ceiling and walls, the water droplets initially flew randomly in the yard, but then they spread out in circles. Finally, they passed through the roofs and branches of the community until they flew more than 2 kilometers away. People came and went in the community on the weekend, but no one noticed the water droplets passing over their heads. Even if they did, they would only catch a glimpse of the light at most. They could not understand the truth behind it. The water droplets that were controlled by soul power could naturally reach the location covered by soul power. However, Luo Nan also comprehended Her Majesty Empress Wu's philosophy as he operated. As the distance between him and the water drop sword grew longer, he needed to expend more soul energy to maintain his connection. It also required many auxiliary structures to adjust. While making use of them, they also had to pay attention to the problem of running in. After all, it was the interference of the mind with the material plane. If there was no order between the two, it would cause unnecessary consumption and interference. As for how to ensure the most effective cooperation, there was only one way: practice. Without going through hundreds or thousands of mistakes, it would be impossible to understand the subtle and complicated relationships hidden within. Needless to say, training full of mistakes also consumed a lot of energy. According to the general knowledge Luo Nan grasped during this period of time, even if the basic structure of the condensation ring wasn't damaged, Luo Nan just needed to adjust the other 3 auxiliary structures. It would take roughly half an hour to reach the limits of a mentally enhanced awakened. However, Luo Nan didn't need to consider the issue of consumption at all. He only felt that the feeling of hitting wherever you pointed, within a range of more than 10 square kilometers, was super cool. He even thought that if he extrapolated from this logic, wouldn't it mean that as long as his soul left his body, wouldn't he be able to run around the streets with the dripping sword? Moreover, with his soul body sensing range, if he was in the Nade district, he would be able to cover the entire Nade district. If he was in the River Wu district, he would be able to surround the entire River Wu district. How was this dripping sword compared to the flying sword and the ancient legends to behead people? Thoughts spun in and out of his mind, but in the end, he just shook his head in self-mockery. The lethality of the dripping sword was extremely limited, and it was difficult to control and transform it. There was a most basic bottleneck that determined his train of thought to be nothing more than wishful thinking. The out-of-body state was similar to what ancient metaphysics called the yin spirit leaving one's body. There was no material medium. Though one could travel 1,000 miles in one night, one could not do anything to the material world. There was no interference power to speak of. In this way, as long as his soul left his body, the condensation ring would naturally. Luo Nan's mind was suddenly stupefied. After the blank period passed, his previous train of thought was completely washed clean. The following thoughts were like grasslands after a spring or summer rainstorm. They grew endlessly. What would happen? What would happen to the condensation ring after his soul left his body? That's right. Soul strength needed to have a material medium in order to be used in the material world. If he first left his body and then made the condensation ring, his interference power would not reach a certain level. He would never be able to carve it into shape. But now, he had already made the condensation ring in advance. He had embedded this precise structure into the boundary between the mental and material planes. Though its nature was rather subtle, it was already in actual existence from the perspective of the material plane. It was tantamount to him having made a machine. This machine could automatically gather raw materials, water molecules, and carry out production. All that was left for him to do was to fill it with fuel, soul strength. In this way, when his soul left his body, the condensation ring would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the carrier. It would be possible to realize interference. Wasn't that right? Luo Nan lay down on his bed, cutting off all his thoughts. It was better to directly test things out than to think about it. Even if he failed, he would only lose a fine-level condensation ring. At this stage, he would just lose a piece of blue equipment. As he mentally prepared himself, he decisively went into an out-of-body state. In the next second, he pulled his soul out of his body and floated out the window. He floated side by side with the 1 centimeter diameter water bead under the warm afternoon sun. There was quite a bit of time between now and noon, but the slanted rays of sunlight and the dense yang energy in the air still transformed into formless astral winds. They blew endlessly against his soul body, and the consumption of soul strength suddenly rose by a large amount. There were very few B-rank powers who could go into an out-of-body state. Very few of them would brazenly go astray in the day and compete with nature in the first 2 or 3 years after they reached this realm. Student Luo Nan relied on the format pyramid production line to produce soul strength in an unending stream. He had abundant stamina and was able to do this willful method. Luo Nan still didn't consider the problem of consumption. Right now, he only paid attention to the condensation ring. The water bead had yet to collapse on the purely material plane, and there was no obvious wear and tear. As for the condensation ring at its core, it was extremely stable. It steadily consumed soul strength. Everything was calm and tranquil. It was natural. This feeling was like being engraved in a lens. It was preserved in a negative, the moment of a swift paddling through the water. Though the watermark was shallow, it was nearly permanently engraved. The infusion of Luo Nan's soul strength gave this simple remnant image a new layer of color. Through a different form, it obtained a life force. Perhaps there was a problem with the analogy he chose. Right now, Luo Nan's heart was filled with a swift, causing a nearly delusional realization to appear in him. It involved the mutual interference between the mental and material worlds. Luo Nan felt that when the interference occurred earlier, the user seemed to have warped time and space to an extremely small extent. The user had intercepted an extremely minute fragment from the endless river of time that Luo Nan had experienced. Then, the user had used soul strength to endow it with new meaning. Damn it! This topic was too deep. If Luo Nan thought a bit deeper, his brain capacity would explode. Plus, his train of thought had clearly gone astray, so he decisively gave up. In any case, the facts before his eyes verified Luo Nan's initial thoughts. There was no problem at all with continuing to control the condensation ring after his soul left his body. The two naturally intersected. There was a continuation of a timeline and a cause and effect relationship. Who created who? Who attached to who? It formed a very interesting circle. Luo Nan had a faint conjecture. Perhaps other mentally enhanced ability users wanted to use their soul bodies to interfere with the material world. They should have done so through similar methods. That was to first create a stable tool that could be attached to. It could be a condensation ring, a hot air balloon, or a glider. As long as there was a small object that could intervene between the mental and material planes, then it would be like what was said in philosophy classes. Humans create and use tools. They are different from all other animals. Then they change the world. Of course, not just any condensation ring could achieve this function. The condensation ring Luo Nan created was a piece of blue equipment. Yes, it was possible that it was a piece of purple equipment. This condensation ring had certainly crossed a certain threshold in terms of precision. It had met some strict standards. Only then was it able to maintain stability for a long period of time in the boundary zone between the mental and material planes. Only in this way could it become a tool, a machine, and not a mere delusion. Luo Nan's soul soared into the air. His soul strength continued to act on the condensation ring, forming an unquestionable interference force. The water bead's bearing capacity was quite weak. Luo Nan tried to add a bit of force, and the bead collapsed into mist. However, the condensation ring structure remained stable, and it continued to gather water. Luo Nan certainly needed to make adjustments if he wanted to go a step further. Luo Nan pondered over the technique within, but his brain was a bit too excited right now. His train of thought was erratic and hard to control. He had just had some inspiration for micromanipulation when a string of seemingly splendid thoughts suddenly burst forth in his mind. Yet he could not find the reason for them, stirring them into a pot of porridge. All right, this was just a reminder. He should not forget himself from excitement. Perhaps he had overlooked something. He could think deeper. Were there any relevant factors that he had not considered? Luo Nan pondered for a while to no avail, so he changed his perspective. What problems had he not resolved over the past 2 days? The economic crisis in the format pyramid, the remodeling of the star atlas, the root receptacle, the root nature, and the root nature, the outsourcing of Her Majesty Empress Wu's business, the paranoia of his aunt and uncle, the setback in the exploration of the mysteries of gear. Luo Nan only discovered that there were so many unresolved problems on his body after a rough combing through. This was still a time of peace. If the threats from headquarters, the Order, and Quantum Corporation were added in, would he still want to live? Luo Nan reflexively wanted to rub his own head. He wanted to see what sort of person was capable of stirring up all these threads together. However, it was his soul body that moved. The body lying on the bed in the room was motionless. This was the inconvenience of a mental journey. Hiss. The spiritual light was like a blade, instantly severing all of his chaotic thoughts. It was also like an electric shock. The powerful light tore through his mind, illuminating the hazy world for a time. Stimulated by the spiritual light, an object that existed within his brain but was not part of his flesh and blood appeared. It trembled endlessly as his soul strength entered and exited it. The external neuron. Luo Nan finally thought of it. He had pondered over how to interfere with the source of the material plane after his soul left his body. Wasn't it because of the external neuron? That night, his soul left his body to explore the mysteries of gear, but it was difficult to enter. He speculated that it was very likely because he did not bring the external neuron with him. Later, he tried to absorb it purely with his soul strength, but he failed miserably. Then he created the reversal of true energy, using the material to interfere with the mental. He burned and refined it, but there were no results. But now, the condensation ring had fallen from the sky and brought him around a corner. It had actually easily and skillfully crossed the great gate of his soul, interfering with the material world. With the support of the condensation ring, his out-of-body soul was able to possess interference power without going through his fleshly body. Couldn't this method be used with the external neuron? Right? Right? The thought was unstoppable once it formed. Luo Nan was unable to continue thinking. His soul body immediately threw itself back into the room, restoring the faintly discernible connection with his fleshly body. Then he willed it, stimulating the external neuron to produce a response. There were no surprises. The electric dragon that remained within his brain radiated a brilliant radiance. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swam outwards. Electricity seeped out from between Luo Nan's eyebrows in the next moment. Luo Nan instantly severed the direct connection between his soul and fleshly body. The external neuron had just thrown itself outside his body when it lost its guidance. Naturally, it was about to retract back. Luo Nan's soul strength drove the condensation ring to meet it. On the mental plane, electricity and the condensation ring structure collided. There's a way. How could there be contact if there was no interference? Luo Nan's joy only lasted for 1/100th of a second before the external neuron's powerful impact crushed through the condensation ring. The accumulated droplets of water simply collapsed into mist, leaving not a single drop behind. The 3 auxiliary structures that supported the condensation ring were instantly wiped out. As for the condensation ring itself, it shook violently. Luo Nan's heart sank. Was the condensation ring's carrying capacity still insufficient? Before Luo Nan could find a basis for his rising and falling emotions, the electricity of the external neuron instantly split apart. It actually followed along the structure of the condensation ring, changing and flowing. It was like a special kind of ink that followed along the traces in the void to re-inject itself. In turn, Luo Nan's soul strength was affected by the pull. It followed the traces left in the void and walked once more. Luo Nan had a clearer understanding of this process. Oh, that's not right. How was this filling? This was simply using the structure of the condensation ring as a mold. Electricity took the lead, and the main body of the external neuron came afterwards. Holy crap! Luo Nan could only watch helplessly as the condensation ring he was so proud of exploded by the external neuron. There was no luck to speak of. Even though Luo Nan had repeated the phrase, "blue equipment," 10,000 times in advance, his heart still twitched when things came to a head. It was a good thing that he didn't scream. Just as he hated that he couldn't beat his chest and stamp his feet, a certain stimulus flashed in his mental senses. It was like a red-hot branding iron that pressed down. Luo Nan finally couldn't hold it in. Even though he was in his soul-body state, he still let out a cry. A structure of flowing electricity appeared in the void. It had a diameter of 0.02 millimeters and a thickness of about 1/4. Its shape was smooth and round without edges. It was like a hollow donut, but the volume was completely incomparable. This hollow structure floated in the void, steadily seizing and absorbing Luo Nan's soul strength. At the same time, it absorbed the water molecules in the atmosphere, quickly forming a scale. The first droplet of water was gathered, reflecting the sunlight. It was a riot of colors, like a condensed rainbow. This was the external neuron, but at the same time, it was also the condensation ring. A dove taking over a magpie's nest. Or perhaps it was a rebirth. Chapter 381. A 7 to 8 centimeter long metal thread that was shaped like a spider's web and emitted electricity on the mental plane transformed into a hollow donut with a diameter of 0.02 millimeter and a thickness of 0.5 millimeter in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Just like that, it weaved and perhaps condensed and shrank, finally forming a microscopic structure on the micron scale, and displaying a wonderful quality between the material and the spiritual plane. Fine. In any case, Luo Nan had never truly grasped the external neuron's volume, weight, and material. Luo Nan was quite cautious about the new condensation ring floating in the air. His soul force touched it carefully, but the other side was incomparably cooperative. With just a thought, he could control it effortlessly. It felt no different from the previous version. At first, Luo Nan was cautious, but later on, everything went smoothly. He was already unable to distinguish the difference between the two versions of the condensation ring. Subconsciously, he controlled the water droplets to fly up and down in the bedroom. The rest of his brain was occupied with thinking, what concept is this? What is the principle behind this? What kind of trick is this? Why the F***CK? His emotions, which had been muddled by the miraculous changes of the external neuron, finally recovered the momentum that he should have after repeatedly thinking about it to no avail. With a surge of emotions, all of his thoughts were overturned. Even though the scene of Luo Nan seizing his body and exchanging his bones was a wondrous creation, and the mysteries within pointed to the essence of the universe, it was unable to overcome the ecstasy that surged within Luo Nan's mind at this very moment. No matter how good the theory was, it couldn't beat reality, right? Luo Nan already understood the practical significance of the changes. From now on, he could carry the external neuron with him to any place that his soul body could reach. Of course, this also included gear. The human mind was just that strange. No matter how strong the desire in the bottom of one's heart was, one could still remain calm when the goal was just out of reach. However, once the goal was confirmed to be within reach, all the previous cultivation would be instantly broken. Before the pleasant surprise brought by the external neuron faded, Luo Nan's mind was occupied by gear. Luo Nan confirmed that gear hid a great secret. It was a great treasure trove for him. As the key that was most likely to unlock the treasure, the external neuron also hid a big secret. Perhaps only when the two came into contact would they appear at the same time. He didn't know if his conjecture was correct, but how would he know if he didn't try? Luo Nan was a bit unable to control his emotions. He was impatient right now. The soul circled around the bedroom 3 times and came up with 3 reasons. First, today is Sunday, the construction team will not work, there are no miscellaneous people waiting there. Secondly, the soul could leave the body and bring along the external neuron. The micrometer scale structure was equivalent to the cross-section of a spider's silk. It was extremely tiny and could come and go quietly without anyone noticing. Thirdly, it was still early. He could make a round trip within 5 minutes. There was plenty of time to explore. If everything went well, he could come back for dinner. If things didn't go well, he could go back again after dinner. All the reasons were in support. All the conditions were in place. What was there to wait for? Before he could finish his thoughts, his soul body charged out of the room, ignoring the window screens and whatnot. When he reached the courtyard, he flashed out of the neighborhood and charged into the sky. Luo Nan clasped the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, and the flying speed of his soul body was not affected in the slightest. Faint traces of water could be seen in the courtyard, but he disappeared without a trace as soon as he entered the sky. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun seemed to be at the same level as the dense forest of skyscrapers. Only the endless light still floated in the clouds. At this time, it was approaching the peak traffic period. Small and medium-sized aircrafts were also shuttling back and forth in the high-altitude traffic layer. The late autumn sun was slightly warm, and the high-altitude airflow was dense and cold. The two intersected, and the impact of Luo Nan's emotions melted a bit. He suddenly came to a realization. The external neuron had a physical body. Only the heavens knew what the consequences would be if it were to collide with something while flying at high speeds. There was nothing wrong with rushing to excavate the treasure, but he was carrying the external neuron. If he were to lose it in a careless operation, he might as well smash his head into his bed and play soccer. Luo Nan was about to fly out of the Nade district by now. His thoughts stirred, and the flying speed of his soul body slowed down a bit. He was a bit further away from the uppermost traffic layer. As for the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, it floated in front of his soul body all this time. The condensed bead of water had lost too much energy from flying at high speeds. It was practically shapeless. Even though it was endlessly replenished, it was still several times smaller than when it was at its peak. An odd thought crossed Luo Nan's mind when he saw this situation. In the next moment, he used his soul strength to guide the external neuron into the interior of his soul body. As long as he didn't get into a car accident, the external neuron would be fine. The feeling of his soul body swallowing the external neuron was very subtle. This was because there was a constant transmission of soul strength between them. After the external neuron was absorbed into his body, this transmission relationship was completely assimilated into the interior of his soul body. The process was roughly like this. The soul body would first pour soul strength into the condensation ring that the external neuron had reconstructed. The power of nothingness would naturally possess the nature of interference power. It would gather the water molecules in the void. Under the high-speed flying state, the bead of water would be lost at every moment, but it would be endlessly replenished. The early stages of the accumulation of water molecules existed on the nanometer scale. Luo Nan could do nothing about it, but he could sense the large-scale condensation of water vapor in the later stages. This feeling was like the soul body inhaling and exhaling water vapor, carrying out a peculiar breathing. It naturally formed a connection with the outside world. In the traditional sense, the soul body was only at the level of a yin soul. Of course, it was impossible to realize such a connection. In fact, the source of this phenomenon came from the new version of the condensation ring. The interference power emitted by the condensation ring gathered water, and it acted back on the soul body itself. It permeated into every corner of the soul body. And then, Luo Nan's high-speed flight came to an abrupt stop. He hovered high in the sky, and below him was the stream of light from the aircraft whistling past. It was as if the entire city was operating at high speeds. Only he stood alone in the sky, distancing himself from the world below him. He didn't have the leisure to sigh with emotion. He just happened to find an interesting processing machine for his soul strength. This machine swallowed nothing and came out something. It absorbed 0 and came out 1. It burned nothingness and condensed reality. This was the condensation ring. This was the external neuron. As the interference power gradually pervaded, it was as if a set of incorporeal skeletal meridians had been stuffed into the soul body. It was draped with flesh and tendons of the same nature. Well, this description was a bit too exaggerated. A more realistic way of saying this was that Luo Nan's soul body seemed to be plated with a layer of gradually closing incorporeal yet marvelous membrane under the full effect of the interference power. Figuratively speaking, Luo Nan's soul body seemed to have turned into a cloak. Luo Nan's core consciousness resided in the center, and he made contact with the mental and material worlds at the same time through this cloak. The cloak became the facet of the mental and material worlds, intersecting with both planes. It was thin to the point of nothingness, but it had marvelous effects. Luo Nan's consciousness was wrapped in this cloak, and it had a bit of an independent flavor. It seemed that there was an indescribable layer of separation between the mental and material planes. The feeling was subtle. The current Luo Nan was no longer on any plane. Instead, he existed in the interlayer between the mental and material planes. Wherever his mind went, he would sink in that direction. Of course, he was in a soul-body state right now, so he naturally leaned towards the mental plane. The resistance he faced on this side was minimal, close to 0. Forcefully interfering with the material plane would certainly consume a lot more energy, and there would be a few more links. But no matter how much energy was consumed, it was still a breakthrough in his essence. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly flashed, and the incorporeal cloak stirred. It heavily smacked the nearby void under the surge of soul strength like a storm. Wind appeared out of nowhere under the sunlight, and it transformed into a fine stream. It spun and traveled several dozen meters away, nearly brushing past the upper edge of the high-altitude traffic layer before finally dissipating. The stream of air went far away, and Luo Nan's state of mind was like a whirlpool, endlessly turbulent. However, his state of mind had swelled to the extreme by the time the stream of air dissipated. See? Such a crude attack pattern was able to cause considerable turbulence in the material world. What did this mean? It meant that Luo Nan had leaped out of the stage of soul embodiment, the level of a yin god. He could truly interfere with the material world, shifting the interference force from the tiny structure of the condensation ring to the entire world. Such progress was like jumping from the ground to the clouds. But under the catalysis of the external neuron, it was logical and natural. This was because this was a jump from nothing to something. It was a qualitative change from 0 to 1. 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. It evolved into limitless possibilities. It was impossible to overstate the great significance of the external neuron from this perspective. And to put it bluntly, all of this was brought about by the external neuron. How did it accomplish this? In the end, what kind of product was it? What else could it do? It could serve as the framework for Luo Nan's God gear. It could serve as the materialization of the structure of nothingness. It could serve as the pivot for the transformation of soul strength. And all of this seemed to have only unearthed a small side of the external neuron. It could do much more. For example, gear, 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 gear. The more doubts Luo Nan had in his mind, the more expectations he had for gear. He knew that this sort of mentality wasn't healthy, but he was unable to endure it no matter what. His soul body suddenly entered a state of flight once more, and its speed increased. Right now, his connection with the outside world grew more and more real. His perception of the late autumn setting sun and the high-altitude cold wind grew clearer and clearer. It was to the point where he forgot himself. He roused his power and howled to his heart's content. He didn't deliberately attack the material world, nor did he have the substantial power to stir the void. But the incorporeal attack on the mental plane still rapidly spread in all directions. It was fortunate that Luo Nan hid himself deep enough on the mental plane. He didn't go to a depth where most ability users could probe and create a major event. Even if he did create a major event, Luo Nan couldn't care less. He cut into the Pingjiang district of Acumen College in the blink of an eye. Gear was already in sight within the range of his mental senses with a radius of over 20 kilometers. At this very moment, there was nothing else that could attract Luo Nan's attention other than gear. But there was a difference in the magnitude of the attractive force within the various regions of gear. Luo Nan's mental senses covered the area, and he locked onto the westernmost region of the building on the ground of gear. It was a large atrium 50 meters deep and 20 meters in diameter. With a sudden jump, Luo Nan's soul body cut into gear. He arrived within the atrium and floated in the center. His feelings of urgency and anticipation suddenly transformed upon reaching his destination. Luo Nan began to become nervous. He was just as anxious as he was before. He was just as anxious as he was now. His emotions transformed to the fullest, not missing a single bit. The fluctuations of his mood didn't affect his perception at all. Within the atrium, the entire structure of gear guided and gave birth to a chilling aura. It was just like what he experienced on that night. Wave after wave of energy gathered here. After the orderly flow of energy shifted, this place lost all dominance and became chaotic. The ticking sounds rang out on the mental plane. They seemed to have a clear rhythm, but they didn't have any direction. It was like someone had purposely messed up a password lock, waiting for a successor who knew the secret to come and crack it. Of course, the successor would need to bring a special key. Luo Nan's soul body floated in the air. He suppressed his turbulent emotions and sensed earnestly for a moment. He confirmed that the current situation was no different from that night. He followed the solution from last time and gave himself a boost. He stirred the chaotic aura within the atrium once more. Last time, Luo Nan's boost revealed a classical visualization structure. It was the geometrical figure of a tetrahedron, inscribed sphere, and circumscribed sphere. But as the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the external symbol this time changed into a rotating nebula. Its appearance was greatly different. But the effect was the same. It gave this space a thrust of order. It began the process of cyclotron acceleration like a particle accelerator. Once this process began, there was no option to slow down or stop it. Luo Nan's soul body floated alone in the atrium. He calmly welcomed the crazy scene of layers of restriction, rotation, and acceleration. He also experienced the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane. The layers of strange information intersected. He knew long ago that the mental plane in his eyes was different from the vast majority of ability users. The mainstream theory of the structure of the mental plane divided the mental plane into 3 zones, 1 region, and 1 domain. It was simple and clear. But from Luo Nan's perspective, the mental plane was a deep multi-layered structure. There were hundreds of layers, thousands of layers, and there was no end. The vast majority of phenomena on the mental plane of the inner world could be calmly explained using general theory. In comparison, Luo Nan's perspective was far too cumbersome and complex. However, Luo Nan had never seen an explanation that was more accurate and appropriate than his multi-layered curtains perspective in describing President Ouyang's logic world. Yes, the logic world. Luo Nan never stopped pondering over the strange phenomena within the atrium over the past 2 days. He already felt that the atrium cyclotron he sensed right now was actually a bit similar to the logic world. At the very least, it was a method of distorting the mental plane. Of course, there were more differences. Chapter 382. From Luo Nan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world used the complex structure of the mental plane to forcefully pull the distant plane over, forcefully linking it with the surrounding material world. It was like casting a hook to fish. It looked casual, but the purpose and logic were extremely strong. It was just that outsiders had no way of knowing. The atrium cyclotron took the form of the order bestowed by Luo Nan as the core. It stirred forcefully, causing the nearby region to weave and twist, pushing outwards layer by layer. It was like grabbing one end of the bedsheet and twisting it forcefully. This would cause the other end to spin, pushing it closer and further. On the other hand, the logic world already had a blueprint and was constructed layer by layer. As for the atrium cyclotron, it started from the inside out. First, it changed itself. Then, it probed into the distance. One was building a house. The other was the telescope. It could be seen that the effects of soul strength were different. The structures and algorithms were different. The results were as different as heaven and earth. Luo Nan had always suspected that the huge increase in the range of his mental senses after that night was due to the effects of the telescope structure. Right now, the information gathered by the telescope was gradually enriched. The gray-white light smeared and interweaved on the mental plane, gradually materializing to reveal the marvelous landscape of the clouds high in the sky. But no matter how close the telescope's perspective was, the real situation was still separated by a layer. Last time, Luo Nan had fallen here. It was impossible to truly touch the cloud world that he yearned for day and night with just the telescope structural model. It was something that Luo Nan could only do if he didn't rely on external objects. But today, he had the external neuron. The external neuron didn't have any particularly obvious reactions during the early stages of the Far Gazer realm's formation. It was just that the bizarre cloak that had just taken shape had already revealed a special quality due to the external neuron's influence on the road. The cloak warped and rippled within the rapidly rotating atrium vortex, but it maintained an inconceivable degree of flexibility and independence. It continued to display its ability to interfere with the mental and material planes. Because of this, the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane were connected to the surrounding material environment through the cloak. It was just a little bit, but it was like the cloak when it took shape. It achieved a breakthrough from zero. This allowed Luo Nan to realize a small portion of the effects similar to the logic world. It formed a warped independent region around his soul body. The problem was that the most powerful aspect of the logic world lay in its logic. That was the decisive factor in its construction. Luo Nan did not possess that sort of logic. After the interference between the mental and material planes was achieved, the corresponding area no longer belonged to the scope of the faraway realm structure. There was no specific order and it was purely a superfluous thing. It would also increase the burden of the soul body. In just a few short seconds, the cloak had become a little sluggish. The excessive structure directly affected the efficiency of the soul energy conversion. As the situation continued to worsen, the external neuron, which was the center of the conversion, was finally stimulated. The condensation ring constructed by the external neuron showed signs of instability for the first time. Some of the lines were extracted from the condensation ring and reached the center of the structure of the condensation ring, where they performed new structures on the microscopic level. This was a completely spontaneous action of the external neuron. Luo Nan's consciousness did not participate. In fact, the scale of the fabric this time had already been probed down to the micron level. It exceeded the precision of his senses. Were it not for the fact that the external neuron and his consciousness were tightly linked together, Luo Nan would not even have the slightest of senses. Though this was the case, Luo Nan's state of mind was pounding and throbbing. He gradually became high-spirited. He was unable to clearly probe the composition of the external neuron, but the chilling aura and the myriad of changes in the curtains were clear to see. During the rotation acceleration process, the chaotic, distorted interference between the mental world and the material world began to show regular fragments. The corresponding interference forces no longer conflicted and melted each other. Instead, they piled up and spun, achieving a certain reflection with the structure of the telescope. If the rotation speed of the telescope was said to be 10, then the region that Luo Nan could interfere with and warp had a rotation speed of 1. Every 10 revolutions of the telescope, the interference area would revolve once. It was precise and rhythmic, but it was gradually changing and speeding up. 10, 1, 10, 2, 10, 3. The rotation speed of the telescope was already relatively fixed, but the rotation speed of the interference region was constantly increasing. When it came to the material plane, there were already obvious signs. In the center of the atrium, the light in the void was clearly distorted, and the low sound of bang bang, like the vibration of a bowstring, continued without end. If Luo Nan hadn't lost his temper 2 days ago and destroyed the majority of the surveillance camera's inside gear, this piece of information would have been impossible to hide. How could Luo Nan care about this? His soul body was located in the core region of the distorted void. He could personally experience the extent and speed of the distortion. The cloak was no longer sluggish, but the layers of acceleration accumulated astonishing potential energy. It pushed his emotions endlessly, causing his body and mind to tremble both inside and out. His guess was correct. No matter what form the external neuron took, its existence held an extremely important meaning to Gear. It was like a key was inserted into a keyhole. It twisted according to the rules of induction, and the heavy door slowly opened for him. 10, 4, 10, 5. In other words, when the telescope structure made 2 revolutions with his soul strength, the interference region revolved once as well. The 2 revolutions were perfectly synchronized, and Luo Nan's consciousness went blank for an instant. This was because at this very moment, the stacks of gray clouds he had been paying attention to all this time collapsed without any warning. It was as if the entire sky was pressing down heavily on him. Luo Nan came to a realization in the next second. It wasn't that the firmament was pressing down. It was that he was piercing through the clouds. Heaven and earth had already shifted. Luo Nan crashed into the depths of the nearly boundless grayish-white cloud layer. His perception of the outside world was a bit more realistic thanks to the existence of the cloak. Clouds piled upon each other under the dim lighting. Smoke flew about, and a blood-like color seeped through the gaps between the clouds. A direct chill and the ear-piercing howl of the wind came at the same time. This place seemed to be some high-altitude region, probably the upper part of the troposphere. The airflow was intensely disturbed, like a never-ending tsunami of clouds and mist. The airflow swirled the clouds, water droplets, and ice crystals. It swept past with a rumble, violent and manic. The astral wind blew through the gaps between the clouds. Luo Nan could see that there was an even vaster space beneath the thick clouds. It was just that it seemed to be covered by a prairie fire. The blood-red color between the gaps between the clouds was the reflected light. That's right. It's here. It's here. Luo Nan looked all around. He saw the cloud world that often appeared in his dreams, and he personally experienced this absurd yet realistic scene. Even though he didn't know where he was and it was hard to distinguish between things, his impatient and unavoidably absent-minded emotions from the past 10 days finally knocked the last nail in his coffin, and it fell to the ground with a bang. He let out another howl under his impassioned excitement. This time, the cloak stirred the clouds and ice crystals, and a wave of grayish-white air rumbled out. But soon, it was swept flat by the fierce whistling high-altitude astral wind. It was annihilated within the surging and flowing clouds, leaving no trace behind. The vile environment of this place could be seen at a glance. However, no matter how vile the environment was, Luo Nan, who had entered in his soul-body form, received the same effects as nothing. It wasn't like last time, when he had entered with his fleshly body in a muddle-headed and relaxed manner. Since he didn't have the ability to fly, he fell madly all the way. It was hard not to be flustered under the darkness of the sky. He held on for a dozen or so seconds, worried that he would fall to the ground and die without a corpse, so he could only move out. He never expected that it would be so difficult to enter again. In any case, it was hard for Luo Nan's imagination to run wild when faced with such a vast world and experienced such a marvelous and strange place. In the final phase of Gear's atrium, the telescope became a silo under the magical effect of the external neuron. Luo Nan was directly transported to this cloud layer of unknown origin and unknown position. Only the heavens knew how far this place was from Xia City and Gear. A few 100 kilometers? He had never heard of a similar environment around Xia City. Tens of thousands. All right, this was very fantastical. It was very pretentious with extraordinary power. It was useless to let one's imagination run wild. Though it was difficult for Luo Nan to enter this place this time, he was 1,000 times more relaxed than last time. He decided to observe carefully and gather as much information as possible to provide a basis for his later judgment. Observation and reconnaissance had always been Luo Nan's strong suit. Pure observation combined with the living starry sky gave him an effective observation range of over 20 kilometers. Aside from extraordinaries who were unable to grasp accurately, this was a top-notch observation range in the modern world. And as the saying goes, knowing oneself speaks for itself. After Luo Nan comprehended the principle of the structure of the telescope, the utilization of his soul strength had a clearer goal. He consciously adjusted and optimized it, and there was still considerable potential to be excavated. If this continues, it won't take too long to break through with an observation range of 25 kilometers. But who the hell can tell me which part of the world has a cloud layer that exceeds 50 kilometers in thickness? And it doesn't even have a boundary. Luo Nan was at the peak of a young man's memory. His general knowledge of geography was quite decent. He remembered that the relevant course had taught him that it was impossible for the cloud layer to exceed the height of the troposphere. And the Earth's troposphere was the highest at the equator. It was only 17 or 18 kilometers. The polar regions were only 8 or 9 kilometers. What the hell was 50 kilometers? Yes. He was too timid last time. He couldn't hold on for more than a dozen seconds before fleeing. According to the results of his observations, how could he live up to the cloud layer thickness if he didn't freefall for 5 minutes? His soul body floated within the cloud layer, staring blankly for a while. During this time, the two sides of the cloak interfered, condensing mist for him to form a blurry human silhouette. It was very likely that it would become more lifelike if this continued for a period of time. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He had already begun to feel that something was wrong. Not to mention the thickness of the cloud layer, the blood-red color within the cracked and warped cloud crevices did not fade for a long time. He had previously taken it for granted that this was the influence of a great fire burning on the surface of the earth below, or perhaps a volcanic eruption. He was even prepared to use this to further clarify the specific coordinates. But right now, the range of his mental senses, which he was so proud of, couldn't even go beyond the cloud layer, let alone confirm a volcano. Moreover, was it really a volcano? Luo Nan was deeply doubtful. His observation continued. The living stars were spread out, displaying a simple ecological map within the range of the mist. A few believers continued to display their usefulness in the surroundings of the core star cluster of the cell format, but the life forms further away had already switched to another group. It would be quite awkward to say, another group. The cloud region was inconceivably vast, but the density of life forms was truly urgent. Luo Nan could only detect 2 or 3 kittens within the range of his senses of over 20 kilometers. Oh right, what did he say just now? Kittens. Luo Nan's thoughts had yet to come to a realization when a thick cloud suddenly exploded a dozen meters in front of him. Smoke scattered in all directions. A dark red shadow flashed into existence out of thin air. It was as swift as lightning, smashing through the cloud layer and pouncing in front of Luo Nan in the blink of an eye. A thick and long arm smashed over, and its sharp claws distorted Luo Nan's perception. Only now did the boiling murderous aura appear with a rumble. Not only on the material plane, but on the mental plane as well. It brought forth a terrifying attack akin to an eruption of lava. The change happened right in front of him. There was no room for him to operate his thoughts. Luo Nan could only make the most instinctive reaction. The cloak interfered with the mental plane to the greatest degree. He ignored everything else and his soul body escaped to the deepest depths he could reach on the mental plane. The blurry silhouette formed from the mist exploded and shattered, turning back into water smoke. The attack on the material plane had hit nothing but air. But the most fatal attack was still on the mental plane. He had been thinking of a volcano just now, but now there really was a volcano erupting on the mental plane. It was as if Luo Nan had returned to the time when he first saw the terrifying might of the human-faced arachnid. He looked at the enormous specter that was burning and expanding in the void. The specter faced the sky and roared, extending its claws to strike over. It was truly like an erupting volcano, a pillar of turbid smoke and fire that smashed into the clouds. The mental plane trembled and swayed. The burning demonic claw, brimming with the desire to destroy, chased after the tail of Luo Nan's soul body. It crushed through several hundred layers of the curtain structure of the mental world to form a shadow behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan could already feel the breath of the Grim Reaper. However, the Grim Reaper's scythe was unable to hook onto its target in the end. Luo Nan didn't know just how deep he had dived into the mental plane. He only knew that the burning demonic claw had crushed through nearly 1,000 layers of curtains in succession before finally reaching its limit. No matter how much it ignited with its killing intent, burning through and warping the majority of the mental plane, it was ultimately unable to crash into the level of Luo Nan's soul body. It was just a little bit off, but it was still not enough. And in reality, the powerful attack missed. The dark red shadow completely disregarded the laws of matter. Its figure came to a halt like a steel nail, smashing into the clouds. It seized the position of Luo Nan's cloud aura silhouette and used malevolent eyes to stare fiercely at Luo Nan. What the hell was that? Luo Nan was both shocked and furious. His reaction to stress just now was truly extraordinary. It was all thanks to his soul body. If his fleshly body had come in, wouldn't he have been smashed into a meat patty just now? No, from the speed and strength of the attack just now, he would probably have been blasted into smithereens. He would have died without an intact corpse. It was fortunate that he hadn't encountered such a situation the last time he came in. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have happened. Right now, Luo Nan was like entering a wildlife sanctuary. He was sitting in a fully armed tour bus, separated by a layer of transparent glass. He was in close contact with a dangerous ferocious beast. As for the ferocious beast, it was entrenched in the clouds, revealing its malevolent body. Its height should be between 5 to 7 meters. The reason why there was such a large discrepancy was because its body was crooked like an ape. Its forelimbs hung down, making it hard to judge. Chapter 383. The skin of the beast was dark red, and its bulging muscles were covered with a layer of fine scales. Its bald skull was wrapped in a thick layer of wrinkled skin. The top of its skull was deeply caved in, and its eyes bulged out. Its pupils were dark red, and its background was dark yellow. Its mouth and nose were almost indistinguishable, forming a circle of dark purple that looked like a paste. Saliva flowed from its mouth, making it ugly and ferocious. Just by looking at its appearance, there was no doubt that it was some kind of mutant species. It looked a little like a gibbon, but it was 100 times uglier. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this fellow belonged to the type of mutant that had already been discovered. In any case, he had no impression of it at all, so he gave it the name of Mush-Mouth Ape at the last minute. At this moment, the rotten-mouthed ape was staring straight at him with its crimson eyes. It was clear that the enemy was able to lock onto Luo Nan's specific location on the mental plane even though the enemy was unable to attack him. Just this point alone surpassed the vast majority of people Luo Nan had encountered. After about a minute, the mush-mouth ape seemed to have grown tired of the pointless staring. Its strong body slowly sank and disappeared into the clouds. Its gaze never left Luo Nan's location until the very end. Its gaze was turbid, but it possessed the cruelty and greed of a predator. This made Luo Nan understand that this mush-mouth ape was treating him as prey. It had no intention of giving up in the short term. As long as it grasped the opportunity to break through the isolation on the mental plane, it would slaughter its way over without the slightest hesitation. It would tear Luo Nan to pieces, then it would devour and digest him. Some time later, Luo Nan's thoughts were verified. Sure enough, the mush-mouth ape didn't leave. It maintained a high level of patience and intense desire. It constantly wandered around Luo Nan's surroundings, ready to make a move. Sometimes, it really did launch an attack. Its tyrannical and overbearing attack pattern was able to exert pressure on Luo Nan even if its attacks failed. From this point alone, the mush-mouth ape truly lived up to its name as a top predator. It was trying to turn a failed ambush into a marathon of death that tested its endurance and determination. Controlling his soul in the depths of the mental plane at all times to avoid the attack range of the mush-mouth ape was indeed quite tiring. He had to use the cloak to interfere at all times, and the consumption of his soul power was considerable. But it needed to be emphasized once more, Luo Nan wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. Important things must be repeated 3 times. It wasn't easy to move around in the depths of the mental plane. The current rate of soul power consumption had indeed surpassed the output of the production line, but only by a little. It was like the evaporation of seawater by the sun. Although the amount was considerable, compared to the total amount of seawater, the consumption was negligible in a short period of time. If Luo Nan wanted to, he could race this mush-mouth ape for several days and nights. They would see who would tire out first. However, Luo Nan didn't have any thoughts of torturing himself. He was even more unwilling to waste his precious time on a meaningless chase. After taking the opportunity to observe for half an hour, he sped up with all his might. With the astonishing flying speed of his soul body, he forcefully shook off the mush-mouth ape's pursuit and regained his peace. Even though Luo Nan had gotten rid of the threat, he saw that the cloud region that Gear and the external neuron had guided him to had such a vicious being. This greatly exceeded Luo Nan's expectations. Luo Nan wasn't purely observing the mutant during the previous half hour of pursuit. He followed the scouting method he had just learned not too long ago. He circled around a temporarily set center, crossed and flew, and did his best to expand the range of his senses. He was unable to obtain an exact number at the moment, but he made a rough estimate. His soul body continued to expand outwards at high speeds. The cross-sectional area it covered probably exceeded 10,000 square kilometers. It was a vast airspace with a diameter of 100 kilometers. It was equal to the size of the core city area of Sia City. But not only did he not discover the limits of the cloud layer, even the top, bottom, and four directions became blurry in the end. Only one thing was clear. The mush-mouth ape he encountered had appeared again and again in this airspace. He no longer had any thoughts of 2 or 3 kittens. Even though there were only a few of these valiant and tyrannical kittens in the 100-kilometer area, it was still too crowded for apex predators. They moved like lightning, and their range of activity was frighteningly large. Luo Nan tried to lock onto 2 of them. He only followed them for a few minutes before the targets jumped out of the limits of his senses. But at the same time, new mush-mouth apes leaped in. Last time, Luo Nan had only stayed here for a dozen or so seconds due to falling from a high altitude. He had avoided a direct confrontation with them. It was simply first-rate luck. Sigh. He seemed to have overlooked something. He needed to sort it out. First of all, his encounter in the atrium of Gear and the marvelous use of the external neuron proved that his mother, and that person, had come here back then. Second of all, regardless of his mother's fate, they had indeed escaped unscathed back then. Luo Nan made a rough estimate of the mush-mouth ape's strength. Judging from its attack power alone, it should be above B rank, not yet A rank. And it seemed to live in groups. It could be said to be quite terrifying. There were a limited number of similar locations on Earth, and all of them were places where even extraordinaries had to take a detour. Did his parents already possess this level of strength back then? It was truly impossible to judge from the bits and pieces of information related to his mother in his memories. Luo Nan could not deny this possibility, but there were other explanations. For example, the cloud world back then wasn't this dangerous. This thought popped up in Luo Nan's mind because he noticed that only the mush-mouth ape and the others flew through the cloud layer. They were extremely monotonous. According to his limited knowledge of ecology, this didn't make much sense. Even if they were mutants, they were still a type of living creature. They needed to survive at the very least, and eating was the most basic. The mush-mouth ape did indeed possess a powerful desire to hunt, but the cloud layer environment was too monotonous. So far, Luo Nan had only discovered this type of living creature. There were no others. There were no other minerals or plants with high energy densities that could be ingested. The basic conditions for feeding them were not present. In addition, even though they maintained a distance from each other and maintained vigilance, Luo Nan couldn't see any intense desire to kill each other. Devouring each other and the like was not a normal option. Of course, Luo Nan considered the mush-mouth ape to be a mutant, to be a living creature. If this thing was a fantasy breed that ate the wind and drank dew, a legendary demonic god, then Luo Nan would ignore what Luo Nan said. Was this the case? The possibility was very, very low. Luo Nan was temporarily unable to draw a life sketch for the mush-mouth ape due to the interference of the powerful life magnetic field. However, the berserk and scorching life energy could not be faked, let alone the corporeal desire to hunt. All in all, Luo Nan concluded that these mush-mouth apes were very likely affected by special factors. They had temporarily entered this area. For example, hunting prey. The mush-mouth ape that had just killed Luo Nan not only possessed brilliant and skilled hunting techniques, but its choice of attack was also very appropriate. It hunted with caution and patience, as if it had practiced this frequently. Luo Nan drew a simple inference from this. They should have a target, at least in the near future. They were adept at roaming the mental plane. They very likely possessed the ability to interfere with the material world. They possessed a certain counterattack method. They had even caused a vicious mutant of B-rank strength to suffer a loss. They were mainly active in the cloud layer, but it was very likely that they had gone to other places and provoked a pile of trouble. All right, there must be a target. Luo Nan's chaotic thoughts finally became clear. But after becoming clear, his first thought was to slap himself in the face. If his guess was correct, he had personally thrown the target in. It was that snake tongue. That's right. He had hurriedly entered and exited the cloud layer through gear that day. Luo Nan still had Snake Tongue, who had suffered a backlash from the curse, in his hands. He didn't know how he had thrown Snake Tongue away, but he thought about it carefully. Indeed, it was most likely that he had thrown her here. If this was the case, Snake Tongue wouldn't have suffered a backlash from the Nightmare Vine spell while she was in a fugue state. She shouldn't have fallen to her death and been here for 10 days, right? Luo Nan was a layman when it came to the curse branch. But after that day, he did some understanding of Snake Tongue. He knew that this woman was one of the few curse experts of the inner world. Her mental state was extremely formidable. No matter how fierce the backlash from the curse was, it wouldn't be able to trap her for long. If he were to consider this line of thought, then the current situation would have a relatively clear explanation. Of course, this was pure conjecture. Perhaps his mind was obstructed, and his train of thought was wrong, leading him in the opposite direction. But in any case, Luo Nan's current mood was showing signs of worsening. The joy and sense of accomplishment from overcoming countless difficulties and finally entering the cloud world had long since been scattered by the volcanic eruption of the mush-mouth ape. But before he could sort things out, he thought about the matter with Snake Tongue. He thought about the great secret his mother had hidden for many years. He didn't even have a clue about the bizarre and wonderful cloud world, and he had been tossed about by a wandering soul for 10 days. What if some extremely valuable clue was destroyed by Snake Tongue? Or perhaps she deliberately hid it and spread it. What should he do? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. Luo Nan made a firm resolution to find Snake Tongue. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her. Even if he was dead, he wanted to see convincing evidence. Luo Nan pondered for a moment and chose to follow a mush-mouth ape. He would observe it for a long time before making a decision. But the stalking didn't go smoothly. Luo Nan's chosen target wasn't the one that had attacked him before. It was just a random choice. This fellow's body was a bit smaller, but it was just as valiant. Luo Nan was deep in the mental plane, exceeding the attack range of the mush-mouth ape, but the ape still sensed him. The long stalking caused the target to react greatly. It turned around to chase and attack many times, but it was never able to touch Luo Nan's true body. It became extremely manic, constantly going in circles, refusing to cooperate. Luo Nan was annoyed, but he couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the same time. Such keen senses and the ability to suppress the material and mental planes at the same time were simply perfect methods in the domain that the mush-mouth ape could reach. From the information obtained by the society, extraordinaries were excluded from the various ability users due to the different nature of their abilities. For example, the format of Fire of the Burner could attack a Darksider species like the human-faced arachnid, but its destructive power was a bit weaker than in the material world. It wasn't like the mush-mouth ape. Its destructive power was astonishing no matter what plane it was on, and there was no obvious loss in conversion. As for how it was used, how much experience could Luo Nan earn from observing it a few times? Even if Luo Nan wanted to copy it, it would be hard for him to do so. He could only drool at the mush-mouth ape's methods. Time passed like this, second by second. Luo Nan knew that it would be hard to find any clues related to Snake Tongue if this continued. He was just about to change his train of thought when a strange feeling spread over from the other side of the void. Chapter 384. Luo Nan was certain that the connection between his soul body and fleshly body was still there even though he had moved through the void. It was just that the distortion was severe, weaker than it had ever been. He couldn't estimate the distance at all, and his perception of the details was also a problem. Luo Nan was a bit flustered when he sensed what was happening over there. He didn't care about anything else, but he was worried that his aunts would come home and see him lying on the bed like a corpse. They would send him directly to the hospital. Even though Luo Nan had 10,000 hopes of doing an in-depth exploration of the cloud world and ascertaining Snake Tongue's whereabouts early on, reality was right there. He still had to kneel. With a thought, in the empty center of the condensation ring structure, the new structure formed by the external neuron released a corresponding signal. The soul cloak's interference method changed, and in an instant, the world changed. In the depths of the clouds, the messy tail ape, who had been teased for a long time, was still in a rage. The threat that had troubled it for a long time had suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. The mush-tail ape had a stupefied expression, and it circled around on the spot a few more times before leaving resentfully. Luo Nan had already returned to the normal world. It was a familiar place. Just like last time, it was still in the tree hole of the withered tree sandbar, a kilometer away from Gear's main building. Sure enough, there was a clear pattern for entering and exiting the cloud world. It was set up intentionally. Luo Nan was both shocked and impressed by his mother's design back in the day. Unfortunately, he was unfilial as a son. He had casually thrown out a piece of trash and caused trouble. At this moment, the connection between the soul and the physical body was much clearer. Luo Nan also knew that it was a false alarm. It wasn't that his aunt and uncle had returned. Instead, it was his wristband vibrating to alert him that someone was contacting him. However, if uncle and aunt called, it would also be a headache. The wristband was not like the hex ear. It did not have the ability to listen to calls from a distance of 80 kilometers. Luo Nan knew that he had to go back. He reluctantly circled around the tree hole, flew into the air, and sensed Gear from afar. Only then did he flee into the air. On the way back, Luo Nan once again set a new record for the speed of his soul body, traveling 80 kilometers in just 4 minutes. This was equivalent to a speed of 1,200 kilometers per hour. It was already infinitely close to the speed of sound. Actually, it wasn't impossible to reach the speed of sound. It was just that Luo Nan didn't know what sort of state the external neuron would be in when it broke through the sound barrier. It was better to be cautious and experiment when he had free time in the future. Luo Nan anxiously looked at his wristband when he got home. He conveniently returned his soul to his body. When his body and soul became one, he finally realized what was going on. External neuron. Just as he thought about it, he realized that the external neuron had returned to the depths of his brain and transformed into its original form of a long electric line. It circled around and formed the carrier of the divine wheel structure, supporting the iceberg-like soul energy. Quite the initiative. If the structure of the condensation ring came in, Luo Nan shook his head in a hurry. He gave up on this standard idea that water had gotten into his brain. He got up and stretched his neck to look at the caller ID on his wristband. He definitely wouldn't be able to pick up the first call. Later on, the person called twice more before stopping. But luckily, it wasn't the uncle and aunt that Luo Nan was most worried about. It was an unexpected acquaintance. Luo Nan blinked. It was actually Mo Han, Sister Pomegranate, who was ranked 16th in the younger generation of his uncle's family. Filled with doubts, he dialed the number back. The call was quickly picked up. The person on the other side said hello twice, and the surroundings seemed to be very noisy. Sure. Sister Han, I was taking a shower just now, so I took off my bracelet. Is something the matter? Luo Nan forcefully pushed the dangerous words back into his mouth. He blurted out a lie and assumed an obedient posture. Mo Han switched the ambient mode, and her voice soon became clear. She was in a good mood. She didn't care whether Luo Nan's reason was true or false. She laughed and said, "I just confirmed it with Peng 17. I'll be there at 7:00 sharp tomorrow night. Little Nanster, prepare to receive me." Tomorrow. Isn't it tomorrow? F***ck, he forgot that there was still a torment. Luo Nan opened his mouth, but the words of refusal didn't leave his mouth in the end. Mo Han was a lively and straightforward girl. There were only a few people of the same age in the Mo family who truly treated Luo Nan as a younger brother. After the incident at Frost River Reality, Mo Han even made a special trip to the hospital to visit him. Speaking of which, didn't this sister feel any lingering fear last time at Frost River Reality? That's right. Their group of people had been brought back to the police station early on. The impression they left behind was just a group fight. As for the situation in the news report, it was mostly separated by a layer. In this way, Luo Nan was the one with a shadow in his heart. Luo Nan ended the call with Mo Han with absurd emotions. He turned his hand and called Mo Peng. The moment the call connected, Luo Nan bluntly asked, "What the hell is with this constantly expanding team?" Mo Peng was yelling, "Do you think I'm happy? It's clearly a get-together. Isn't Shirley helping her family by going there? So hurry up and find someone. Find a fierce and handsome guy to bewitch her. Don't ruin our brother's plan. Plan your sister. I don't have a sister. Go find my sister." Luo Nan thought of Emoya, who was about to embark on her return trip. He immediately shivered and said unhappily, "Just how many people are you bringing? Which idiot leaked the information?" I admit it." Luo Nan was so stupid that he cried. He simply hung up. Luo Nan looked at the time again. His aunt and uncle could come back at any time. It was no longer suitable for his out-of-body state. He could only wait until nightfall to discuss it. His soul body withdrew, but Luo Nan's mind was still spinning in circles above the clouds. He diligently pondered on how to detect the shape of the sky over there as soon as possible. He wanted to find Snake Tongue's whereabouts, but he didn't have a clue for a time. After thinking for a long time, he changed his angle. He remembered that there was still a very crucial question. Where in the world was the region above the clouds? Boundless, thick clouds that defied common sense. Burning bloody light flowed between the gaps in the clouds. The powerful mush-mouth ape flew here and there. Each element was extremely distinctive, but when gathered together, it was like a casually drawn demonic face. It was hard to distinguish. The reason for this was that the elements that formed the demonic face were somewhat contrary to the logic of reality. Luo Nan was even thinking that this wasn't some place on Earth, but a fantasy land. Luo Nan put aside his fantasy thoughts for now. He needed to consider the problem from a practical and measurable perspective. He didn't consider the thick clouds for now. He didn't care about the source of the bloody light. He just started with the mush-mouth ape that he had observed for the longest time. The mush-mouth ape should be a type of mutant without a doubt. It had gregarious tendencies and powerful strength. According to the knowledge he had learned, high-level mutants had quite a strong sense of territory. Only a small portion of the mutants resided in large groups, and the area was relatively fixed. If Luo Nan was able to investigate its species, there was a high chance that he could determine where on Earth this world was. Luo Nan gave it a try. He transformed the image of this monster into a mental signal and searched on the psychic wave network, but he didn't find anything. Clearly, relevant information didn't exist in the public information. He once again had the idea of obtaining classified information. This was a bit more troublesome. Right now, the Xia City branch's secrecy system was being implemented step by step. Anyone who wished to access classified information and utilize related resources needed to apply for access privileges. The threshold wasn't high aside from a very small portion of special information. However, access records would be left behind for future tracing. It was said that the secret level of the database was sealed off in passing after the branch exchanged large amounts of information with the military. Yuan's work was certainly involved in this. No matter what other people said, she was modifying the behavior of the ability users of Xia City bit by bit. Luo Nan first subconsciously applied for an intelligent search service, but he suddenly reacted and chose to cancel it. This was a bit of selfishness. He didn't want to expose too much information regarding the cloud world. He hadn't even figured out his mother's inheritance, yet he wanted everyone to know about it. What was the point of this? The more he wanted to protect his food, the more Snake Tongue's existence was a thorn in Luo Nan's heart. He needed to find that female ghost as soon as possible no matter what. Luo Nan nearly wanted to kill his way to gear, but he was still rational. He knew that he couldn't cause any new problems before dinner, so he forcefully suppressed the urge. He needed to adjust his state of mind. He thought for a bit and took advantage of the time he was applying for access privileges to the database to borrow the Mutant Species Encyclopedia, Inner World Edition, and some other video and text materials related to mutants. He also pulled up the video materials from last year's intermediate training class, supplementing the handouts and notes Papercut had sent him. He needed to act like an obedient child at home before dinner. Using the precise and nimble dripping sword to pass the time was just right. Luo Nan didn't deny that he had a very special feeling toward the dripping sword. Not to mention the dripping sword's own effects, the structure of the condensation ring had truly made a great contribution. It drew in the external neuron to form a central structure that transformed interference power, thus forming a soul cloak. It could freely choose the direction of interference on the mental or material plane, freeing Luo Nan from his weak and frail body. Needless to say, Luo Nan would owe this favor when he entered the cloud world. Once a person developed a sense of intimacy toward a certain skill, they would possess an abundant driving force. At first, Luo Nan just wanted to pass the time, but when he truly began to research, his standards unconsciously rose higher. Not only did he need to improve upon the core structure of the condensation ring, but he also needed to carefully ponder over several auxiliary structures. Speaking of which, he was quite curious. The condensation ring had undergone a body rebirth with the external neuron. Could auxiliary structures be added to it? If so, what state would it be and what effects would it have? With a single thought, Luo Nan simply went into an out-of-body state. With just a slight thought, the condensation ring structure appeared from the nothingness of his consciousness. It was engraved in the void, and the external neuron seemed to possess intelligence. It sprang out at the same time, following the relevant structure to take shape. Since the process was extremely short, Luo Nan couldn't tell whether or not his consciousness had directly controlled the external neuron to form the condensation ring. Also, he could faintly feel a tiny point in the hollow structure of the condensation ring. This was the key structure that opened the door to the cloud world in the atrium of Gear, affected by the cyclotron acceleration. Whoa! It even has a memory function. Luo Nan was truly convinced. The structure at the center of the condensation ring was already below the nanometer scale. It was impossible for Luo Nan to study it with his current abilities. His mind rippled a few times, and he returned to practicing with the dripping sword. He first experimented. He assembled the three auxiliary structures, the guidance, the amplification, and the acceleration, in a probing manner. In the structural design of the dripping sword, the amplification structure was a stabilizer. It ensured the continuity and stability of the long-distance effects of soul strength. The acceleration structure was like the nitrogen-oxygen acceleration system of a modified car. It was responsible for explosive acceleration in a short period of time. On the other hand, the guidance structure was used in micro-operations to increase the sensitivity of operations. These three structures complemented each other with the basic condensation ring. Every time a structure was superimposed, its controllability and explosive power would increase. As for the sharpening and rupturing structures, they belonged to the attack modules. They were mainly used on the condensed water beads. Luo Nan had yet to try them out. Luo Nan was actually quite worried that the condensation ring, after undergoing a body rebirth, would reject the other auxiliary structures. Therefore, he placed them very carefully. The early stages were pretty good. The new version of the condensation ring accepted several auxiliary structures very generously. Though there were differences between the real and the virtual, the control was quite smooth. Luo Nan was just about to be happy when he saw the condensation ring split into lightning. The lightning leaped into the three auxiliary structures. The auxiliary structures didn't even circulate for half a circle before they collapsed one after another. It was hard to support them. Ha! Luo Nan didn't feel defeated when facing this scene. He just felt that it was a bit familiar. Wasn't this the situation when the external neuron and the condensation ring were connected? Luo Nan thought about the tiny structure at the center of the condensation ring. Could it be that the new version of the condensation ring had the spare power to perform a body rebirth on the other auxiliary structures? Luo Nan carefully sensed the entire process of the auxiliary structures collapsing. He knew that he couldn't let the external neuron take the blame. In fact, he had learned the auxiliary structures quickly. They weren't polished like the condensation ring. The structures were too rough, and they weren't stable enough. The lightning was uniform, and there was air leaking in all directions. There was no value in using them as a reference for reconstruction. In other words, he needed to meticulously sculpt the auxiliary structures and dress them up beautifully in order to gain the favor of the external neuron. What the hell? Ridicule was ridicule, but Luo Nan was still looking forward to it. This precise and exquisite painting style was very much in line with his aesthetic standards. And if he could really do it, wouldn't it be a dripping sword structure completely forged from the external neuron? Metal. Actually, Luo Nan didn't know if the external neuron's peculiar material could be considered metal. But the flexible and tough combination of material molding was perhaps the sword pill of novels. When the time came for him to use it against an enemy, the enemy would think it was a bead of water, but it was actually a solid particle. Its penetrative power and lethality would increase by 10-fold or 100-fold. That would be fun. He needed to think about it a bit more. The external neuron was such a precious thing. If he were to toss it out like a hidden weapon and it was taken away by some powerhouse, he would be better off dead. Luo Nan began a new practice amidst this tangled mood. The 5 auxiliary structures were far inferior to the condensation ring in terms of complexity. But he still needed a lot of painstaking practice in order to reach the level of refinement and precision. Luo Nan was smarter or luckier than the others. He was the first to create a blue or purple level condensation ring. He had a reference template and a standard. Luo Nan attracted the external neuron to undergo a rebirth. It was tantamount to having an indestructible carrier and testing instrument. Any of the auxiliary structures that lacked precision would not be able to pass the threshold of Luo Nan's subconscious. Even if he managed to fool it, the external neuron would feel that the quality of the harem wasn't good. Electricity would burst forth, and any defective product would immediately disintegrate. This was another torturous process. Luo Nan had just wanted to kill time before dinner, but he never expected that he would spend the next 4 or 5 hours on these auxiliary structures. He had no choice. When a person's brain became excited and their concentration increased, it was not easy to reverse their direction. Chapter 385. Luo Nan's mind wasn't too good the next day. He sat in the classroom, his mind dispirited most of the time. His mind was blank during class. Not a single bit of what the teacher said entered his ears. Shuele only met up with him before the 3rd class. He was shocked to see Luo Nan's condition. You broke your training. I stayed up late. Luo Nan's answer was concise and clear. He had been practicing the dripping sword until midnight yesterday. After the night class, he couldn't help but go into an out-of-body state. He crossed half the city and entered the cloud world from gear. He continued his search, constantly familiarizing himself with the environment. His search yielded no results, but he didn't sleep the entire night. His mind was dispirited from going back and forth. Shuai was a clever person. His first reaction was, "Did you miss your morning and evening classes?" "Nope." Luo Nan rolled his eyes and yawned. Shuai spoke very seriously, "It's about the same even if you didn't miss it. Blood and energy are nourished and consumed during training. It's very complicated. Your way of playing is like lighting a lamp and boiling oil. The effects are halved. Then what should I do? How about I sleep for a bit during class and you help me keep an eye on things?" "That's fine too." Luo Nan reached out to poke him. "Bad friend." Luo Nan buried his head in the crook of his arm before Shuai could retort. He fell asleep in the span of 2 or 3 breaths. To be honest, although he hadn't left the house for the past 2 days, he had experienced too many changes, absorbed too much information, and learned too many things. His brain had reached its limit, and he really couldn't take it anymore. In any case, this was a public class. The enormous lecture hall was the best cover. A few possibilities flashed through Luo Nan's mind before he fell asleep. For example, Shuai calling him, Peony calling him to begin the search mission, the society calling him, and so on. But things were hard to predict. What truly woke him up from his dreams wasn't any of these factors. It was a stimulation that came from the mental plane. It came from a position that seemed very close, but he couldn't grasp it. The wraith sighing. Luo Nan's thoughts captured the most crucial factor. But before he could truly sort out the clues, a scorching and explosive feeling suddenly exploded. It followed the incorporeal connection on the mental plane and came rumbling, shaking the god wheel. The situation was simply like a meteorite falling from the heavens. It smashed into a vast ocean of glaciers. The god wheel shook for a moment, and the surging and abundant soul strength created waves. It instantly formed a dozen or so tides that came crashing down. Ow! Luo Nan was really caught off guard. The god wheel frame constructed from the external neuron was stable, but the feeling of pain and danger was real. He screamed. His body tensed up, and his entire body. His knee hit the bottom of the table, and the tables and chairs in the lecture hall were fixed. A muffled sound rang out and Luo Nan's entire body bent like a prawn. He hugged his knees and sat down. Shuai was shocked to the side. The first thing he did after coming to his senses was to throw his entire body over to protect Luo Nan. He believed that Luo Nan had suffered an assassination attempt from headquarters or some other power. He wanted to prevent Luo Nan from suffering a second injury. The classroom was silent for a moment, and then the lecturer on the podium said coldly, "What are you doing?" In the next 3 seconds, the classroom went from buzzing to roaring laughter, and the discipline in the classroom instantly collapsed. As one of the best educational institutions in Xia City, Acumen College had never been a place where one could spend their days leisurely. Although they didn't go as far as to implement some sort of militarized classroom discipline, there were naturally conduct points and strict examinations to punish students who caused trouble in class. Luo Nan had shaken the entire lecture theater to the point of buzzing. Shuai had directly pounced on Luo Nan with the weight of empty tie. If Luo Nan didn't raise his blade and make an example out of Shuai, he would be letting down the class time system. The lecturer on the lectern was a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s. Her facial features were quite good-natured, but her expression had turned cold and hard after receiving such a torment from Luo Nan and Shuai. "Get up, I'm fine." Luo Nan struggled to break free from Shuai's oppression. He endured the pain in his knees with great difficulty, and when he straightened up, he saw this scene. He was already exhausted to begin with, and his reaction was much worse than usual. He was even more sluggish, and he could only display a stupefied expression, unable to do anything. Shuelei was about the same to the side. He still hadn't switched out from his bodyguard identity. Right at this moment, the young female teaching assistant, who was a support staff member, walked over to the lecturer's side. She said something in a soft voice. The middle-aged female lecturer's anger was suppressed, and she spoke coldly. "Students, please stand up." Luo Nan and Shuelei glanced at each other, and they obediently stood up. "What are your names?" Luo Nan and Shuelei had already accepted their fate. They lowered their heads and said their names, but they were a bit vague. The female lecturer didn't care. She just said, "Students, if any one of you isn't feeling well, you can go to the infirmary and get treated as soon as possible. Don't disturb the other students in class." "Yes, yes. He's having hysteria. I'll immediately take him." Shuelei reacted, and he directly made Luo Nan into a mental patient. He made a supporting gesture, and he supported Luo Nan as they walked down step by step amidst the chaotic laughter of the students. Luo Nan's knee was injured, and he really was limping. The two were like this. They didn't dare to raise their heads, and they cut a sorry figure as they left the classroom. Luo Nan's absent-minded mind recovered a bit just before they left the room. He noticed one thing: the young female teaching assistant who had persuaded the lecturer was actually someone he knew. Tianxi. They hadn't contacted each other since the incident at Ocean Sky Cloud City. Presumably, Tianxi needed quite a long period of time to sort out her emotions. But he never expected that they would meet again in such a manner. Luo Nan didn't feel comfortable saying hello, so he left in a hurry with Shuelei. But the bell rang before the elevator even reached the bottom floor. Luo Nan only found out after asking Shuelei that it was the last class of the morning. This fact hurt Luo Nan quite a bit. Things wouldn't have escalated to this extent if he had been a few minutes late. His wristband vibrated at this time, and the name of the contact appeared. Luo Nan rushed to pick up the phone. "Senior Sister Tian, thanks for just now." The caller was none other than Tianxi. Her tone was gentle and calm, just like a friend she often interacted with. "It's nothing. Teacher Wu has a very good heart. She asked for your name, and she didn't scan it through the class system. That means that she wants you to open up. Otherwise, it would be hard to avoid deducting conduct points. That's all thanks to Senior Sister Tian's help. I'll treat you to a meal later." Luo Nan spoke in passing, and he suddenly felt that these words were very familiar. It seemed that he had said these words more than once in the past few days. Actually, this was normal. As his social range expanded, his interpersonal relationships gradually became more complex. It was hard to avoid social interactions. What other words could it be if he didn't say these words? Chapter 386. That's right. This was in line with Ocean Sky Cloud City's victim setting. Luo Nan thought this way, but when he heard the sigh, he felt quite subtle. His mind became much more lively and quick-witted. He immediately smiled and said, "Then Senior will treat me to a meal." Tianxi reacted extremely quickly. "Tonight? Today?" Luo Nan jumped in fright. "I have an event tonight." "Really?" Tianxi's tone was filled with doubt. Perhaps she was even a bit disappointed. This made Luo Nan feel embarrassed. His mind spun, and he suddenly had an idea. "Oh, right. Senior, you should come and participate tonight." Tianxi was surprised. "Invite me?" "Yeah. You actually know them. It's Mo Pang and Mo Han. Remember? They're your cousins." Last time at Frost River Reality. Her voice suddenly cut off. Luo Nan's mind became more and more agile. He knew that Tian-Si was probably a bit embarrassed. After all, the last event was to create an opportunity for her to socialize with Luo Nan's third cousin, Mo Chiu. It seemed that nothing had come of it. It really wasn't that kind of thing to participate again. Well, with Luo Nan's social skills, this kind of slip-up was inevitable. Luo Nan didn't know how to remedy the situation when Tian-Si chuckled. Okay. I just happened to bring Tian-Chi. He's close to your age. We had a good time last time. I heard that he keeps in contact with someone from your family. Huh? Something like that happened. Regardless of whether Tian-Si was telling the truth or not, it was fine as long as she didn't mind. Luo Nan let out a sigh of relief. For him, this arrangement could be considered as killing two birds with one stone. Mo Pang and Mo Han were both devil incarnate level fellows. There should be someone older to suppress them. Tian-Si had a socializing experience with Mo Chiu, so she had an awkward halo. Let's see how those two fellows deal with this. Wasn't it a bit despicable to think like this? Luo Nan ended his communication with Tian-Si and shook his head. His thoughts spun, but his expression sank. The event tonight was just a small matter. The extraordinary power and corresponding information that the Wraith sign transmitted just now were the key issues that needed to be carefully understood. Logically speaking, the Wraith sign was still in the Blood Flame Order's territory. He was herded every day, searching for other faced arachnid avatars to devour. From a city's safety perspective, the Wraith sign was a first-rate scavenger. This sort of action of the Wraith sign had brought quite a bit of trouble to Luo Nan in the past. The Wraith sign supported Luo Nan on the path of imbalance between body and soul, walking further and further. However, ever since Luo Nan constructed a clear framework of body and soul, coupled the rotation of the God gear and body gear, the Wraith sign's sudden hunt and devour, the negative effects it brought to him grew smaller and smaller. Luo Nan was more than happy to leave the Wraith sign with the Blood Flame Order to collect some information and secrets. But in that instant, the Wraith sign exploded with an attack on the mental plane. It could be said to be the most intense attack Luo Nan had ever encountered since he received the Wraith sign. According to Luo Nan's conjecture and understanding, the instantaneous undulation was very much like when it suddenly encountered a powerful enemy. It unleashed its full combat power, then it won the battle and swallowed up the enemy. Only then did the comet collide with the Earth appear. The truly intense segment only lasted for an instant. Luo Nan didn't have the time to see it before he missed it. Later on, he was distracted by the embarrassing incident in the classroom. By the time he had the time to pay attention, the Wraith sign had already calmed down. Luo Nan could only see the Blood Flame Order's herder, Elder Mo Luan, from the Wraith sign's perspective. The herder was in the form of a black smoke soul body. He was flying swiftly and swiftly. However, the black smoke that was hard to see with the naked eye was scattered and indeterminate. Elder Mo Luan's condition was a bit of a mess. He should have been injured. Luo Nan had done some research on Elder Mo Luan recently. He knew that Elder Mo Luan was a core power of the Blood Flame Order. He was a dual cultivator of spells and martial arts. At his peak, he was an existence that even extraordinaries would cast sidelong glances at. Elder Mo Luan was only 60 years old. He was only in the prime of his life. He should be at his peak. Unfortunately, he had suffered serious internal injuries during the split of the order. He had never been nimble, and it was even harder for him to break through the boundaries of extraordinaries. His bodily functions rapidly declined. In recent years, he had relied more on spells to support himself. But even so, he was able to suppress an elite of the society like old Mr. Bai. It was quite amazing. And if Elder Mo Luan was truly forced into a corner, Elder Mo Luan would ignite his life force and summon the blood flame will to descend. Elder Mo Luan's combat strength was extremely terrifying. Then came the question. Who could kill and injure this veteran B-rank power? It must be known that even He Yuan had borrowed the psychic wave network to invite President Ouyang to carry out a long-range attack. The result would have been the same. But if Elder Mo Luan was at the level of President Ouyang, how could the Wraith sign win in battle and devour him? Oh right, what did it devour again? The structure of Luo Nan's god gear was gradually stabilizing, but it was affected by the impact. The water level of the vast iceberg sea rose explosively, and there was a marvelous sensation of a sudden rise in temperature. He observed for a moment and discovered that this was the result of the friction and conflict between two sources of power. Clearly, the thing it devoured this time wasn't another human-faced arachnid's avatar, but something else. The difference in nature is quite large. After forcefully devouring it, digesting it is quite strenuous. Luo Nan guessed in a circle, but he was unable to come to a conclusion. It must be known that the Wraith sign was intrinsically chaotic. It acted purely by instinct. It lived forever in the present. It had no concept of the past, the future, and it had no relevant memories. Luo Nan didn't know how to inspect the memories of his believers. Even if he knew, he wouldn't know where to start. He could only watch helplessly as Mo Luan and the Wraith sign secretly escaped into the distance. There was no other way. He could only give the Wraith sign a reminder. He would immediately shift his consciousness whenever a clear change occurred on the other side. Noon was extremely tight and precious for Luo Nan and Shuelei. Naturally, they politely declined the school hospital. The two ate lunch after activating the extravasated blood in Luo Nan's knee. Then it was time for afternoon classes. Luo Nan cultivated in addition to the eye's orifice. He also cultivated in the mouth and tongue orifice. He had to take care of his internal organs, so the time required was longer. After everything was done, he only had a short period of time to take a nap. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He had to go to class. It was hard not to feel a bit emotional. Well, it could also be said to be grumbling. Morning, afternoon, and evening classes. It's not easy to persevere through them. My time is divided into 3 parts by these 3 classes. Of course, it would be great if I could cultivate wholeheartedly, but a slight change would make it hard to satisfy both sides. That's why. Why is it that many martial arts seniors like to go into seclusion once they reach a certain level? It's because they want to avoid the interference of the outside world to the greatest extent. However, since we're cultivating in this world, we will be affected by the turbid currents of the human world. How can we always follow the prescribed order and be smooth sailing? Cough. You can't use these words as an excuse. Got it, senior brother. Luo Nan groaned. He stretched his back on the trolley, and the bones, flesh, and tendons of his entire body crackled. The endless turbulence and the rising temperature of the vast ocean of icebergs was a bit lacking in stability. But when it coupled with the body gear, the interference force formed was much more active. Luo Nan had his afternoon classes earlier, but he felt the heart lantern burn brightly. The spiritual pool was overflowing. It followed the rise and fall of his vital energy. It was like a stream of snow melting under the spring sun. It seemed warm yet cold, and it revolved around his internal organs. His tempering suddenly increased by 20 to 30%. It could be said that he had received some nourishment. This was a sign that the eye's orifice and the mouth and tongue orifice were resonating with each other. Luo Nan originally thought that he would need at least 10 days of effort. He never thought that there would be results in less than 3 days. It had to be said that this was closely related to the great supplement pill that the Wraith sign had forcefully swallowed. Shuelei, who was next to Luo Nan, nodded over and over as he listened to the signs that appeared on Luo Nan's body. You've really entered the threshold of fleshly body tempering. Let's practice Sanzho this afternoon. Let's spar. Luo Nan shot a glance at Shuelei's arm that could reach his thigh. He didn't respond to Shuelei's words. He just asked, tonight, the large activity area, Frost River Reality. You're going too? Shuelei obviously wouldn't refuse. He even reminded Luo Nan, don't cause trouble. Leave early and go home. Cause trouble? Luo Nan shrugged. It's done. Then I'll see you at gear. Let's practice Sanzho first. Shuelei emphasized once more. I have a class today. Doesn't that just leave notes on the most important people of the world? New class. Luo Nan blinked his eyes. He reached out and grasped the air. Then he opened his palm. A bead of water appeared to be stuck to his palm, but it was actually suspended in midair, spinning and spinning. There were only 2 classes in the afternoon, and they were related to writing. In any case, Luo Nan wasn't too interested in them. He didn't pay too much attention to the specifics. He just moved his finger slightly, letting the small bead of water revolve between his fingers. This bead of water was not the external neuron that had undergone a rebirth. It was condensed later. The condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures were complete. The bead of water swam across his fingertips like a blunt blade cutting across skin. It looked as if it could collapse at any time. This was not an illusion. If Luo Nan exerted a bit too much force with his fingers, it would be tantamount to placing a bomb on his fingertips. He would suffer. Luo Nan's control over his fleshly body was far from enough. If he practiced for too long, an accident would certainly occur. He completely relied on mental control. This was a relatively good training method. It was one of the daily cultivation techniques taught by Her Majesty Empress Wu in the intermediate training class in Xia City. But right now, Luo Nan's mind wasn't completely focused on it. The Wraith sign had just sent a signal. After over an hour of tossing and turning, the unlucky Elder Mo Luan had finally returned to his secret hideout. He was communicating with the others. This was a high-class member suite of a large fitness center. The interior of the room was decorated in a purplish-red color. The lighting was dim, and it carried a bit of an exotic atmosphere. The room wasn't small, but there were only 2 wooden armchairs set up in the corner. Yoga mats were placed in most of the space. There was also a treadmill, a bicycle, an elliptical machine, and other equipment. There was also a small hot spring in the corner. Elder Mo Luan's fleshly body was already here. He sat cross-legged in the hot spring naked. However, Mo Luan's soul had yet to return to his body. His injuries had yet to heal. Perhaps returning to his body would allow him to recover a bit faster, but it would make his body, which was already full of hidden injuries, even worse. Mo Luan could only endure for a while. Mo Luan's soul floated in the room, and the Wraith sign was right next to him. There were 2 wooden armchairs in the room. One of them was empty, reserved for Mo Luan. Even if Mo Luan didn't sit, he still had to show respect. 6 core members of the order had already received the news and were gathered here. Luo Nan was able to recognize all of these people after a month of intermittent identification. Chapter 387. Mrs. Halder was a woman that left a deep impression on people. Luo Nan had the temperament of a homebody. He didn't really recognize people, but he never forgot her from the first time he met her. Yes, it must be admitted that Mrs. Halder's image was quite good. She was around 40 years old, and she was in the gym room right now. She wore a deep purple knitted wool dress and stockings of the same color. She paired it with black velvet high heels. Her hair was tied up in a seemingly casual bun, and a few locks hung down the side of her forehead. She was elegant and concise, like a noble woman who had been in a high position for a long time. However, her somewhat westernized three-dimensional silhouette, her deep eye sockets, her quiet and serene gaze, and the strange slender bloody scar on her right cheek gave her a tough and callous aura. Upon closer inspection, she looked more like a strong woman who had experienced many experiences. In the secular world, she was indeed a queen of the business world. The high-class fitness center they were in right now was one of her businesses. She had inherited her husband's Castle Financial Group, and it had rapidly expanded over the past 10 years. She controlled several well-known fashion and sports brands, and her influence in the field of entertainment and sports grew more and more astonishing. Luo Nan had once looked up information on Mrs. Halder. She was a legendary figure in Xiao City. During the Dark Age, when the Blood Flame Order was internally divided, the reigning chief oblatum of the order cowered before the chaotic conflict of doctrines. This caused the order's sacrificial vessel to be destroyed, causing irreparable losses. In the moment of life and death, it was this Mrs. Halder who beheaded the previous oblatum, her husband. Furthermore, with his strong conviction, he had withstood the violent backlash of the Blood Flame will. Amidst the raging blood flame, he had inherited the position of officiant. He had also relied on the rapidly expanding financial resources of the secular world to stabilize the situation during the order's relatively weak stage, preserving this branch of the Blood Flame Order. The bizarre bloody scar on her right cheek was the mark of the ultimate trial of the Blood Flame will. It was the testimony of the soul-stirring events of the past. Due to her actions of beheading and killing her husband, she became known as the Black Widow of the inner world. Her reputation was terrible, but within the Blood Flame Order, her prestige was unparalleled. Practically everyone was awed by her unyielding and iron-blooded nature. Even a senior elder like Mo Luan was extremely respectful toward her. At this moment, aside from Madame Halder, who was seated on a chair, everyone else was standing. Vice First Oblatum Yin Lu, who had once crossed paths with Luo Nan, leaned lightly on a treadmill beneath the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the wooden corridor outside. His body language was probably the calmest. She had started her career as Lady Halder's confidential secretary. Although she no longer held a position within the financial group, she was the person in charge of the Frost River reality project that the financial group had dispatched. In the secular world, her position was low but she held great power. Within the Blood Flame Order, he was one of the successors that Madame Halder paid close attention to. Apart from Yinlu, the strong man standing respectfully to Lady Halder's right was also an important figure in the church. His name was Meng Chong, and he was one of Madame Halder's trusted aides. He had once been a security captain. Some unreliable reports said that he was Lady Halder's lover, but in reality, Meng Chong was the only one in the Blood Flame Order, apart from Lady Halder and Elder Mo Luan, who had passed the final trial of the Blood Flame will. Logically speaking, his physique should be on the monstrous level, but he was extremely low-key. He never participated in any sort of ranking, so it was very hard to make an accurate judgment. As for the other three, there was an old man with a scholarly air. He was another elder of the order, Jiang Yuanjin. He was a standard member of the primitive religious sect. He was over a dozen years older than Mo Luan, but he was more skilled in theoretical work. His qualifications in the order were a bit worse than Mo Luan's. Jiang Yuanjin used to be an advisor type of character. Later, Lady Halder raised his position in the order. Although he was useless in terms of combat strength, it was precisely because of his and Mo Luan's existence that this faction of the order gained a more orthodox atmosphere in this era of the collapse of sacrificial artifacts and conflicts of laws and logos. Right now, it was this old man who was the most anxious. He was not worried about the injured Mo Luan, but about the wraith sign that was a substitute sacrificial artifact. Of course, in the Blood Flame Order, they called it the mold. How's the mold? Mo Luan, do you have any accurate information? How did you do it? Jiang Yuanjin appeared to be very anxious and at a loss. He was a standard theorist. His own level of extraordinary power was only at the seed level. According to the observations and experiments of the Order, under normal circumstances, the human-faced arachnid's clone would exist on the mental plane at the border of the abyss region and the polar domain. That was the special domain of extraordinaries or B-rank powerhouses who specialized in mental senses. Ordinary ability users were simply unable to sense it. It was only when hunting that the human-faced arachnid would approach the material world. In fact, strictly speaking, there was not a single person in the Blood Flame Order who fulfilled these two hard criteria. Lady Halder had gone through special channels to obtain the herding technique that could capture the human-faced arachnid's clone and forge it into a sacrificial artifact mold. Right now, only Lady Halder, Elder Mo Lewin, Deputy Ablatum Zien Lo, and Ren Hong could use this technique among the core members of the Order. Only these 4 people could see it under normal circumstances. Mo Lewin could not stand this old fellow. He was disinclined to respond. Lady Halder was deep in thought, so she had no obligation to respond. Yin Lo was just about to respond when Ren Hong, who was close to Jiang Yuanjin, spoke first. Old Jiang, the mold is very normal right now. It is currently digesting its food. The structure of the Blood Soul Temple has become more complete. The sound of blood and fire is very clear. Ren Hong's age was close to Lady Halder's. He was around 40 years old. His appearance was ordinary, but his words and actions were mature and appropriate. He normally did not reveal himself, but when he was preaching, he was extremely inciting. He was the backbone of the Order purely by relying on its business. Normally, he would discuss the theories and preaching methods of the Order with Jiang Yuanjin. Their relationship was relatively close. Jiang Yuanjin did not have any misgivings towards Ren Hong. At his age, he really was like a child. He grabbed Ren Hong like he was seizing a toy. He wished he could stomp his feet. Let me hear it. Let me hear it. Ren Hong glanced helplessly at Lady Halder. Lady Halder's eyelids drooped slightly. This could be considered as consent. Don't take too long. Ren Hong first warned Jiang Yuanjin before grabbing Jiang Yuanjin's wrist. He adjusted the frequency of the fluctuations of his soul strength, bringing Jiang Yuanjin's soul strength inside. It was like an amplifier, allowing Jiang Yuanjin to listen to the sound that came from the depths of the mental plane. Blood, blood, blood. Fire, fire, fire. The monotonous, manic, and incessant sound was like a gradually rising platform that pressed down on the mental plane. Layer upon layer, there was no end to it. And because it was nothingness, it could collapse at any moment. After listening for a long time, one's internal organs would begin to convulse and contract. However, in Jiang Yuanjin's ears, this sound was like the sound of nature. He laughed so hard that his eyebrows could not be seen. This is like eating a great tonic. The 2120 steps of the Bloody Soul Temple's path of blood fire now has 1755 steps. Ren Hong confirmed the number, then reminded him, time's up. How can it be so fast? Jiang Yuanjin wanted to act shamelessly, but Ren Hong gently and firmly refused Jiang Yuanjin's request and even pulled away. Jiang Yuanjin wanted to toss and turn again, but Ren Hong gave him a meaningful glance, reminding him that the Lord Ablatum was right in front of him. Jiang Yuanjin had been raised by Mrs. Halder, so he was afraid in his heart. His face twitched, and he finally stopped pulling. He turned to face the master seat and smiled. Then he began to count with a deadpan expression. Last time Mo Lewin reported the number of steps to be 1569. My goodness, this time it's 186 steps. Yin Lo reminded him from the side, Old Jiang, there was a successful hunt last week that didn't make the report. At that time, it was already 1605 steps. A whole 150 steps is too much. Especially the blood flame path, which starts at the end of the 1600 steps. Even if it can't compare to the final 120 steps of the blood flame altar, it still isn't easy to construct. What in the world is this thing? It's so powerful. If Luo Nan hadn't used the Wraith sign to spy on the high-level communications of the Blood Flame Order, he would certainly have been completely baffled. Actually, the so-called Blood Flame Path was the quantitative standard of the Blood Soul Temple structure that the Blood Flame Order had implanted into the human-faced arachnid's avatar. It was divided into 6 levels. The first 400 steps were a stage, and the last 120 steps were the final sublimation stage. Not only did it have numerical quantification, it also had an image. Right now, the hell-like structure that had been assimilated into the Wraith sign's body was piled up layer by layer from the center. It was like a mountain peak of cooled lava. The mountain path on top of the mountain twisted and turned. There were many pores in the mountain rocks, and lava flowed and spat out. It could be described as a river of lava and a stream of fire. It could change the mountain's terrain and shape at any time. But no matter how it changed, there was a majestic and awe-inspiring building at every certain height on the mountain. It was either a palace hall or a cave. They were built next to the mountain, as if they were one entity. This was the embryonic form of the Blood Soul Temple. Right now, 4 buildings had been formed, representing that 4 stages had been completed. The next 5th stage was the formation of the altar on the mountain peak. The final 6th stage was the 120 steps of the blood flame altar. Through the blood sacrifice, the blood flame was internalized into the entire mountain peak, thus forming the complete appearance of the Blood Soul Temple. Luo Nan lacked a deep understanding of secret orders, but he could tell from his senses that this entire process was a step-by-step process. It was quite standardized. Aside from hurting, there were endless sacrifices and refinements every day. They were mysterious and contained magical powers, reflecting the accumulation of the Blood Flame Order's laws and logos. As an internal member of the Blood Flame Order, she naturally did not view the problem as simply as Luo Nan. Jiang Yuanjin had been worrying about the future construction of the Blood Soul Temple. The first 2,000 steps are fine. The 120 steps of blood sacrifice are the most difficult. Just based on the current scale of the order, it is a bit strenuous to perform sacrifices day and night. If we could have this kind of sacrifice. Ren Hong also agreed. That's right. The Order of Justice acted earlier than us. It is said that before Enwing's accident, the Order of Justice had already sent the human-faced arachnid to headquarters. In other words, no matter how we graze in Xia City, it will be hard to gather a complete human-faced arachnid. If we want the mold to be effective, it is hard to avoid seeking other methods. Right now, it looks like the mold's devouring ability still has room for expansion. This is a good thing. Yin Lo was a bit more pessimistic. It's hard to make a judgment just by looking at an example. Jiang Yuanjin clapped her hands. You'll have to ask Mo Luan about this. It was dangerous this time, but if we can really find a way to assist in the blood sacrifice, then it would truly be a boundless merit. Just as her voice fell, a mass of light and shadow unfurled in the center of the room. Mo Luan did not participate in the conversation from start to finish. He just transformed the relevant memories into energy information that could be recognized by specialized equipment. Then he transformed it into an image, allowing the core members of the order to understand the situation at the time. This sort of ability to reproduce memories seemed simple, but in reality, only those who had a deep understanding of the mind and the soul could do it. Luo Nan felt ashamed of his inferiority to Mo Luan's deep and ruthless ability. As the light and shadow changed, it was tantamount to replaying Mo Luan's experience at the time. Due to the nature of human thought, it was hard to avoid subconscious processing and distortions. However, it was enough to serve as a reference. Luo Nan found the scene of the incident familiar. He thought about it carefully and recognized that this was the recycling stratum of the Twin River District. This place was filled with gangs and negative emotions. It was indeed one of the best places for the human-faced arachnid to reside. Mo Lewin gave a brief introduction of the background. He used the mental plane to directly transmit telepathically. However, Luo Nan could hear everything clearly due to the mental connection between him and the Wraith sign. I was just doing my routine patrol at the time. Mold suddenly became very excited. I thought that it had discovered prey, so I immediately went over. But then I saw a bird. It wasn't a bird, right? Jiang Yuanjin relied on his age to speak more casually with Mo Lewin. Mo Lewin didn't bicker with him. He responded calmly, indeed. I only discovered that it wasn't a bird when I got closer. It was a wing-hand bloodbat. Wing-hand bloodbat. Actually, Luo Nan was already stupefied when he saw the image. Mo Lewin's explanation only gave him a confirmation. It really was a wing-hand bloodbat. Luo Nan had participated in the Trigate Security Conference last week. This was the first thing that was introduced. Luo Nan had the deepest impression of it. He knew that this thing possessed a highly contagious virus. It was a mutated type, and it could even control biological aberrations. It possessed an extremely high level of threat. Among the rewards provided by Trigate Security, this thing's corresponding bonus was ranked at the top. It couldn't be this coincidental, right? Luo Nan found it a bit hard to accept this astonishing coincidence for a time. However, he found it even harder to imagine that such a dangerous aberration had other channels to enter and exit Xia City at any time. If this really was the case, then the world line would change into Resident Evil. If it really was the target that Trigate Security mentioned, then wouldn't there be any dregs left after the Wraith sign made his move? Trigate Security had said that the Wraith sign wanted to capture the wing-hand bloodbat alive and retrieve the corpse if it was dead. Well, it didn't matter if it was the Wraith sign or Mo Lewin's out-of-body state. They were just wandering around on the mental plane. Even if they killed the wing-hand bloodbat, they shouldn't have taken the corpse away. Luo Nan immediately became excited. He stared fixedly at the image of light and shadow. He wanted to find the surrounding landmark buildings and confirm the coordinates. However, as he carefully observed, Luo Nan felt that the image was a bit strange. He didn't know what was strange about it for a time. Jiang Yuanjin was also very shocked. It really is a wing-hand bloodbat. How did this thing enter the city? Even the city guards are blind. Oh, it seems a bit different. Mo Lewin answered, it really is different from the species found in the wilderness. Actually, I've always wondered if this thing can even be considered a wing-hand bloodbat. The image of light and shadow just happened to give them a close-up view. This time, whether it was the group of core members of the Blood Flame Order up close or Luo Nan, who was 2 or 3 city districts away, they all saw the problem. Chapter 388. Too tough. This was Jiang Yuanjin's evaluation. It could be said that she was right on the mark. This wing-hand bloodbat was a lot thinner than the image data Luo Nan had seen. Luo Nan still remembered the countless number of wing-hand bloodbats fluttering under the setting sun and the information provided by Trigate Security. Though they weren't large in size, every single one of them was like a savage and powerful canine. Their 4 claws were sharp, their muscles were solid, and their fur was glossy and smooth. Their skin and bat wings were a bit dim, but they were powerful in their flaps. One look and one could tell that they weren't easy to mess with. However, the one Mo Lewin encountered was a typical symptom of dysplasia. Its wingspan was at most 20 centimeters, and it was shriveled and skinny. Only its eyes were blood red, giving it the feeling of extreme insanity. It wasn't even 11:30 in the morning at the time. It was the end of the day on the recycling stratum, the time when the visible light was the most. This wing-hand bloodbat shuttled back and forth between the sunlight and the shadows. Its skin and bat wings let out a strange sound when they flapped. According to the information provided by Trigate Security, this wing-hand bloodbat was an estrus. Of course, it was unable to find its own kind to satisfy it within the boundaries of Xia City. This made it all the more irritable. Perhaps it was this kind of emotion that attracted the human-faced arachnid to discover its target. The wraith sign immediately pounced over restlessly. Unfortunately, these two vicious creatures weren't dealing with the problem of estrus. They were engaged in a life-and-death battle. From the perspective of a normal person, they would at most see the bat's shadow circling in the air. They wouldn't be able to see the deeper mysteries. However, the light and shadow displayed Mo Luan's memories of the time. The levels and details were far richer. This was the first time Luo Nan saw an ability user's memories of the mental plane. He couldn't take his eyes off it for a time. The conflict between the two sides erupted in an extremely direct manner. The wraith sign revealed a human face and an arachnid body. It had 6 eyes and 8 feet, and a chaotic and berserk mental attack radiated out. The wing-hand bloodbat's reaction was a bit slower, but its counterattack was extremely fierce. It didn't use its claws and other substantial weapons. Only its eyes deepened by a shade, and a dazzling bloody mist soared from its body. Thousands of human faces could be vaguely seen as it soared. There were also strange demonic shadows interweaving, treacherous and savage. Such a situation greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. Therefore, even though Jiang Yuanjun knew that this was a scene reenactment, she still cried, "Ah," from the gym. At this moment, Mo Luan's perspective was very close. It was clear that Mo Luan was also very surprised at that time and unconsciously moved closer to observe. The wraith sign showed its incredible fighting instinct. Facing the bloody smoke, it withdrew its explosive spiritual attack instantly, and the void outside its body was twisted. Perhaps it was because the bloody soul temple inside had gradually grown in scale, but it was already showing signs of interfering with the material world. At first glance, the momentum seemed to be slightly weaker, but in terms of endless depth, it was far superior. It was simply like a miniature black hole. The result of the collision between the two sides also proved this point. The blood smoke and cloud chi collided with the outer edge of the distorted void and involuntarily twisted. It lost its burning momentum and was trapped and swallowed up. In a breath's time, there was not much left. As for the wraith sign, his demonic body instantly swelled in size. Luo Nan thought that this was the moment the wraith sign delivered the meteorite. At this point, it could only be said that the devil's sign had won. However, no one expected that the wraith bloodbat would lose most of its blood smoke and cloud chi. Instead, its viciousness was aroused. Its body that was as thin as a match suddenly expanded, becoming as round as a ball. It simply didn't give the wraith bloodbat a chance to react. It exploded with a bang and a bloody mist sprayed everywhere. The hearts of everyone watching the video trembled, including Luo Nan. In his eyes, it wasn't the wraith bloodbat that exploded. It was a million. It was this bloody mist that made even the rampaging wraith sign vigilant. He directly escaped into the depths of the mental plane, temporarily hiding. On the other hand, Mo Luan was too close. He was sprayed head-on by the remnants of the bloody mist. His field of view swayed in an instant, and his energy became chaotic. The video ended there. So it turns out that we were caught in the crossfire. Jiang Yuanjun let out a breath, dispelling her nervous mood. There was a bit of mockery in her tone. However, she soon said in distress, "I was just thinking that if the wraith bloodbat was useful, we could go to the wilderness and kill around. It wouldn't be any worse than a blood sacrifice. But after watching for so long, it seems that something isn't right." It really wasn't right. Everyone present was a veteran ability user. They had gone to the wilderness at least a dozen or so times. The wraith bloodbat wasn't some rare species. Everyone had encountered them before. However, they had never seen the wraith bloodbat in Mo Luan's memories. The Wraith Bloodbat used the blood mist as an attack method. Moreover, if something went wrong, the Wraith Bloodbat would immediately self-destruct. It could even injure a veteran B-rank power. Are there any left behind? Mrs. Halder cut to the chase at this time. In an instant, the gym entered its most serious state. Mo Lewin understood what Mrs. Halder meant. She was asking if there were any samples of the force of the impact that injured him. Generally speaking, this was a very difficult matter, but Mo Lewin answered. There are. An extremely fine thread of blood, like a gossamer thread, appeared out of thin air as he spoke. Actually, it was sent out by Mo Lewin's soul body to appear before everyone's eyes. When this thread of blood was sent out, it was only a millimeter in length. But its diameter was even thinner. It was like a broken spider silk. If it wasn't for the brilliance of the bloody light, people with old eyes like Jiang Yuanjin wouldn't have been able to see it clearly. The nature of the thread of blood was extremely strange. It had only appeared in front of people for a few seconds, but it seemed to swell a bit and elongate a bit. Moreover, it twisted its head and swayed its tail like a living bug. Mo Lewin spoke of the results of his observations during this time. For now, I am unable to define the mode of existence of this thing. It appeared within the blood of the wing-hand vampire bat, but now it exists on the mental plane. It endlessly devours and paralyzes soul bodies, rapidly growing stronger. He was still looking for an adjective when Mrs. Halder cut to the chase, a biological fission reproduction. A kind of mental microorganism, or perhaps a virus. Jiang Yuanjin suddenly clapped his hands, a human-faced arachnid. Everyone understood what he meant. Ian Lo unconsciously stood up straight. It really is similar. Could it be a Darksider species? A species that we have never discovered before. A Darksider species. Luo Nan, who could be called the best listener, suddenly became interested. This thing was a Darksider species. If this really was the case, then it would be the second species that he had seen with his own eyes. Luo Nan had studied the human-faced arachnid in detail during this period of time, but it didn't yield any results. The Darksider species or Darksider life form was a new concept in and of itself. It hadn't even been 2 years since it was proposed. A complete system had yet to be formed, and the amount of information was pitifully small. Luo Nan suspected that with his understanding of the human-faced arachnid, he could list a few phenomena and write a paper. He would receive treatment from a top journal, and he would earn so many honor points within the society that his hands would go limp. Therefore, he still had to rely on himself for everything. Luo Nan discovered that this blood virus was quite different from the human-faced arachnid through his observations. It was just as Mo Lewin said. This thing's stance was quite ambiguous. It switched back and forth between the material plane and the mental plane. Essentially speaking, this was because its living environment was at the juncture between the mental and the material plane. It was an amphibious species. From the results of his current observations, the roots of its growth and strength were all on the mental plane. It didn't have the ability to absorb nutrients from the material world. However, it was unable to dive deeper into the mental plane. According to the conventional division of the inner world of 3 zones, 1 region, and 1 domain, this thing could only move about in the topmost layer of the shallow zone. It was like a mosquito larva on the surface of the water. But if it continued to split and reproduce, then it would be hard to say. After all, it could injure Mo Lewin, but it couldn't rely on its current abilities. Luo Nan could sense that the Wraith Sign, who had been resting idly in the depths of the mental plane after Mo Lewin released the blood virus, aroused its instinctive attention. But perhaps it saw that this thing was too weak. It wasn't enough to fill the gaps between its teeth, so it lost interest. Perhaps it wanted to raise it. While Luo Nan was researching, the others weren't idle either. It's also a parasitic species. Ren Hong tried to make a judgment. So to speak, that wing-hand vampire bat is actually a victim host. Is this parasitic relationship a designated one, or is it an arbitrary choice? Perhaps he just wanted to express his thoughts, but the meaning behind his words was like a cold wind that blew the atmosphere in the room cold. With the complexity of mutants and the pitiful depth of human research, it wasn't strange to suddenly discover a new species, especially the Darksider species that came and went without a trace. However, the situation of being parasitized still made people feel unhappy. In the research of mutants, parasitic and symbiotic relationships were actually quite common. During the craziest mutant era, large quantities of insects and microbes on Earth suffered from warped mutations. They evolved into similar abilities, bringing about an extremely terrifying chaos. There were often people who said that the ability users that appeared in the new era were products of a kind of parasitic and symbiotic relationship. They were mutations caused by special viruses entering the host cells. But it was very hard for people to accept this theory. As humans who possessed high levels of intelligence, they instinctively loathed this sort of image that threatened their self-awareness. 9 out of 10 Darksider species are parasitic. There's no need to say too much. Lady Halder ignored her own instincts with her powerful willpower. She focused her gaze on the swimming blood virus before her eyes. After observing it seriously for a period of time, she spoke softly. It uses the blood essence of the fleshly body to drive a viral fission on the mental plane. This sort of interference method seems berserk, but it's actually precise and mysterious. Is it that hard to get rid of? For me, it would take a few days. It shouldn't be hard if I'm careful, but if I increase the number of samples, then I'll need to observe it. How's the scene? I've already arranged for people to protect it. But due to its nature, I haven't begun to collect samples for now. Come with me again. Yes. No one else had the leeway to interrupt the conversation between the two core figures of the Order. Only when the principles for handling the matter were decided did Lady Halder change the topic. With M.O. Lewin's condition, it won't be suitable for him to continue hurting for a period of time in the future. We need to adjust the candidates. Everyone, discuss this. Everyone's expressions were solemn. What Lady Halder said was a very realistic matter. The founding ceremony of the Blood Flame Order was on December 21st. There were only 40 days left until today. The mold for the Blood Soul Temple had just reached the 5th stage. The progress was smooth, but it could not be interrupted no matter what. In reality, as the human-faced arachnid incident receded and the hunting operation continued, it became more and more difficult to search for the human-faced arachnid's clone in Xiao City. The slightest bit of slack could bring irreparable negative effects to the reconstruction of the sacrificial artifact. The reason why Lady Halder was interested in the parasite on the body of the wing-hand bloodbat was because she saw a possible alternative plan. But before she could confirm the feasibility of this plan, she still had to complete the most basic of tasks. Jiang Yuanjin coughed. Relying on his age, he opened his mouth and listed out the matters that didn't have much significance, but they still had to be considered. The herding law in our hands has already appointed 4 shepherds. Aside from M.O. Lewin, there are the Lord Oblatum and 2 Deputy Oblatums. There are 3 candidates, but considering that the Lord Oblatum needs to prepare for the sacrificial ceremony and coordinate with the Blood Flame Will every day, it is hard for him to split his time. So there are only 2 candidates, Yin Lo and Ren Hong. Which one do you choose? Lady Halder asked directly. Ren Hong. Jiang Yuanjin's response was very decisive. She even gave Yin Lo a glare. Yin Lo is running around outside every day. She's tied up with mundane matters. How could she have the time to hurt? Yin Lo smiled bitterly and lowered her head. She didn't want to argue with this old man. According to Jiang Yuanjin's thoughts, as a deputy oblatum, she should devote her entire body and mind to teaching affairs. As for the business matters, there would naturally be professionals to handle them. For this reason, the old man gave Enlo quite a bit of face. Ren Hong. Lady Halder seemed to be muttering to herself, but she also seemed to be asking. Ren Hong was a bit unsure of her intentions, but he still lowered his head and said, I am willing to temporarily take over the matter of herding. I will listen to the Oblatum's arrangements. Lady Halder declined to comment. She continued to call out names. Meng Chong. Meng Chong responded bluntly, I'm not good at it. I have no objections. Enlo. Enlo was the person involved. She could only say, I will listen to the boss's instructions. She continued her habits from her days as a confidential secretary. She didn't refer to the Lord Oblatum as the boss. Lady Halder's gaze swept across everyone in the room. In the end, her gaze stopped on the face of the person who had been silent all this time. Wu Kuei. Wu Kuei was an ordinary man who could be drowned in the crowd at any time. His stature was short and stout, and he had no sense of existence at all. Luo Nan had observed him for a long time, but Luo Nan still didn't know what Wu Kuei did. Luo Nan didn't know what Wu Kuei relied on to rise to the core of the Blood Flame Order. Wu Kuei's words weren't unique either. Let the Oblatum make the decision. This wasn't the first time Luo Nan had seen this sort of situation. Right now, Lady Halder's words were practically the law of the Blood Flame Order. Aside from Jiang Yuanjin, who purely researched theory and didn't have any schemes, always relying on his seniority to say a few words, the others generally didn't have their own opinions. Mo Luan. Mo Luan suddenly butted in at this time. I feel that something isn't quite right. The matter of coordinating the will of the blood flame is something that not only you, but also Ren Hong. Right now he's the main force of preaching. The 40th anniversary ceremony of the establishment of the order is just around the corner. He has to participate in a series of warm-up ceremonies. This is unavoidable. Jiang Yuanjin retorted, in the end, he isn't the Oblatum. Squeezing out a bit of time should be fine. The problem is that the Blood Soul Temple has already established a connection with the outside world after entering the 5th phase. They are more sensitive to psychic wave interference. Which of the recent ceremonies hasn't had powerful psychic waves? They also need to mobilize the will of the blood flame. All of these things may affect the structure and growth of the Blood Soul Temple. Even if it's hard to judge whether it's positive or negative, do we really need to take this risk before the blood sacrifice? Jiang Yuanjin's expression changed slightly when she heard this. She immediately changed her words. We have to be on guard. Lady Halder nodded slightly. Then it's Enlo. A bunch of words were said, but in the end, it was Lady Halder who made the final decision. Mo Luan would always provide the best reason for her to speak. These were the rules of discussion of the Blood Flame Order. Lady Halder's gaze turned to Enlo. December 21st is the ceremony of the establishment of the order. Nothing can go wrong. For the next few days, hand over the affairs in your hands that can be handed over. Don't think too much. I will send Meng Chong to follow you. You must ensure that nothing goes wrong. Chapter 389. The matter with the Blood Flame Order came to an end, but Luo Nan could not help feeling a bit vexed. It was getting harder and harder for him to dismount. It could be seen that the core members of the Blood Flame Order were extremely determined. They were all aiming to reconstruct the sacrificial vessel during the establishment ceremony. However, due to a freak combination of factors, the Wraith sign had replaced their original mold. This was an irreversible process. If he took back the Wraith talisman now, the Blood Flame Order would become a great enemy, and they would not rest until one of them was dead. However, if he dragged it on, it would only be a temporary peace. He would have to take it back sooner or later, and the longer he dragged it on, the more headache he would have. Unless he gave up the wraith sign, but how was that possible? Luo Nan tossed this vexing problem to the back of his mind for the time being. He thought about how Mrs. Halder was going to investigate the scene. He wanted to go as well. Even if the 1 million had already exploded, as long as he could find some clues, it would still be helpful for the investigation later. Luo Nan did his best to recall the video data, searching for the relevant area. Thanks to the powerful network search function of the information age and the consciousness search function of the hex year, even if it was just an impression, he would soon get the answer. He still felt that it wasn't enough, so he used his authority to use the real-time street view mode on the psychic wave network to adjust the public cameras and confirm it again. The order of the recycling stratum was terrible. Most of the relevant cameras had been destroyed, but Luo Nan spent a bit of time piecing together the images. He was able to find the area where the incident most likely occurred, and he discovered a glaring pool of blood there. At this moment, there were people taking pictures in the surroundings, all of them very carefully. This is the place. According to what Mo Luan said, he had already arranged for people to deal with the scene. That was why it was said that this kind of old man was the most annoying. Luo Nan wanted to eat the first bite of soup, but he was afraid that it would be too much. Glancing at his watch, the first class was about to end. After class, he would find a quiet place and enter an out-of-body state. It would only take him a minute or two to reach the River Wu district. Luo Nan's plan was quite good, and the preliminary work was quite in place. But the true big boss was unwilling to cooperate. On the podium, the cultured lecturer of the writing class said, "Let's not end the class. For the rest of the time, let's practice in class. It's a very basic character logic. Teacher, I want to leave my body." Luo Nan had to kneel when faced with the reality that he had to attend writing classes in a row and that there would be tests. Even if he wanted to sleep on the table, he couldn't. What to do? Given Madame Halder's shrewdness, there wouldn't be anything left of her once she arrived at the scene. Luo Nan's mind was in a mess, but the teacher didn't care about him. She directly threw out the requirements for writing practice. The goal of the practice was character logic. There were a series of requirements. The student had to make sure that the words they wrote corresponded with each other. The initial requirement was simple: describe an impressive person. Make sure you know the person well. Family, friends, and classmates were all fine. He could start with a description of their appearance. Of course, this involved a series of details such as the shape of the face, mouth, nose, eyes, eyebrows, beard, and so on. The Luo Nan of 2 months ago might have had a narrow range of choices, but it was much easier now. He had chosen Shuelei, whom he had interacted with the longest. Yes, Shuelei was closer to the understanding of normal people. Shuelei was his target. The writing teacher must have a prying eye. Following that, there was a series of information such as address, health, family, education, love, marriage, history, religious orientation, actions, and thought patterns. Finally, the interaction with the target should also be listed, such as specific instances of helping or sabotaging each other's actions. There was a commotion in the classroom. Did this mean that their friendship was over? Luo Nan wrote in a very relaxed manner. It was like a sketch pieced together from words. This was his advantage. At most, he only needed to consider the content that exceeded normal thinking and logic. Perhaps Luo Nan was affected by this relaxed state, but the key points in his mind suddenly opened. As he wrote and wrote, his train of thought flew away from Shuelei. It was just like what his teacher had always tried to express. Characters were a collection of social relationships. A single person's ability was limited. The help of friends and social cooperation were the only ways to increase efficiency. Why did he have to think of such an inefficient method like skipping class? His train of thought was clear. His writing might not be divine, but he knew what to do next. A strand of his mind was thrown out, and ink responded dozens of kilometers away. Luo Nan didn't have the time to pay attention to the progress of Trigate Security's operation over the past 2 days. He just divided a bit of his mind to ensure that ink was obedient. Actually, the official search mission had already begun on Sunday. Right now, it was the free time for professionals. Peony and Long 7 had split up to lead a group of people to collect clues. They would summarize and analyze the clues every day, but there had been no progress so far. In other words, luck was very important. Luo Nan activated the telepathic thought he left on Ink's body, and his consciousness descended. Ink was already used to this. It flapped its wings twice, expressing its welcome. Luo Nan's consciousness had just arrived, and he had yet to do proper business when he first felt a bit of peculiarity. Since Ink had a relatively low level of intelligence, Luo Nan's telepathic thought descended without any pressure. He didn't need to worry about anything. He had the most connections, and the corresponding feeling was the most familiar. Because of this, he immediately felt that something was different when his telepathic thought moved. It was like listening to a familiar song. The singer was the same, but there was a clear difference between the live version and the studio version. It looked like the effects of his 2-day closed-door training over the weekend were greater than he had imagined. Speaking of which, Luo Nan had gone from the fundamental format pyramid to the structure of the living starry sky with clairvoyance. From his internal organs, 9 orifices, and 6 roots to the state of his soul body, all of them had undergone relatively significant changes. This sort of change was all-encompassing. The resulting effects involved the structure of Luo Nan's body and soul, as well as all aspects of his internal and external connections. But because the effects were too broad, many things could only be experienced after actual contact. For example, ink. After the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the connection between Luo Nan and his believers was no longer shackled by materialization. In fact, Luo Nan had become much clearer on an intrinsic level. He discovered at this moment that his observations on the mental plane had already taken on the mode of a telescope due to the effects of the atrium cyclotron 2 days ago. Through warping and weaving mental curtains, Luo Nan could obtain high-definition information from afar using a special format. This was the most crucial reason for the substantial increase in his mental sensing ability in recent times. Before, Luo Nan had only considered the changes brought to him by the telescope mode. Now he saw that ink had become an important fulcrum and reference in this mode. It was like a Cepheid variable star in the universe. Astronomers borrowed its light cycle to modify parameters and measure interstellar distances with greater precision. But from Luo Nan's perspective, every detail seemed to have exceeded his requirements for precision after being modified by ink. So much so that he only had a vague feeling that he was unable to accurately describe it. What sort of reasoning was this? Ink became a bit excited due to the existence of Luo Nan's telepathic thought. But no one else could understand its mood. Peony and the others were on the platform of a tall building in the Forest Wall district right now. They were using viewing binoculars to scan the city district. Ink stood on the binoculars, its claws digging into the outer shell. It was fine if it didn't move, but once it moved, it caused the lens to shake greatly. It was very hard to observe. Peony didn't even raise her head. She continued to use the binoculars to look around, but her slender fingers accurately found the target. She lightly flicked Ink's thick beak. "Mr. Ink, do you have any thoughts?" It carried a bit of childishness, but it also seemed to be teasing. In the classroom, Luo Nan subconsciously rubbed his mouth. He finally recovered from the changes in his ultra-precise perception. He connected the rubber band on Ink's ankle to communicate with Peony. He didn't really know how to deal with this woman, so he simply spoke his coordinates. "Go here." "Oh." Peony stopped adjusting the binoculars' direction. She straightened her body and focused her gaze on Ink. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and a rarely seen expression of astonishment appeared on her face. Then she communicated with her soul strength. "You've discovered something. Are you sure? Where's the source of the information?" How could Luo Nan tell her? He couldn't find any other reason, so he simply shut his mouth and didn't answer. He wanted to say, "Do as you see fit," but he was afraid that Peony would retort back, so he simply had Ink close its eyes and pretend to be confused. Only after doing all of this did he come to a realization. Peony knew that there was someone behind Ink. "Close your eyes, my ass." Luo Nan was greatly embarrassed. There was no need to mention how to remedy the situation. However, Peony didn't get angry. She snapped her fingers and spoke to the support personnel of Trigate Security beside her. "We're going to change the location." "Oh, the effects are great." This was probably the fabled version of "Do as you see fit." Ink still had the appearance of pretending to be asleep. Actually, he had completely absorbed the changes in the outside world and transmitted it back. Luo Nan's mind exploded with joy when he saw that an elite character like Peony, who was hard to grasp, was going to act according to his thoughts. Then he suddenly recalled that there were still people from the Blood Flame Order there. Soon, Haldev and Mo Luan would arrive as well. He wanted to warn Luo Nan, but if he did this, his previous act would immediately collapse. After a moment of hesitation, Luo Nan found a reason for himself. Let Trigate Security make contact with the Blood Flame Order. Maybe they can get more information. Oh, this idea isn't bad. The work efficiency of Trigate Security was quite high. When they heard Peony say that they had a clue, they immediately dispatched a low-altitude aircraft. They only used 12 minutes to complete the transfer. When Peony and the group of support personnel arrived at the target location Luo Nan mentioned, they arrived a bit faster than Mrs. Haldev and the others, who were quite far away. Mrs. Haldev didn't move forward after seeing Peony and the others arrive. She just let the on-site management personnel of the order negotiate with Trigate Security. As for how Luo Nan knew, the Wraith sign wasn't involved in this. That fellow had already changed his breeder, and was currently recuperating at the headquarters of the Blood Flame Order. Luo Nan relied on Ink. Ink flapped its wings and flew up, circling within the shadows of the tall building. Behind the tightly sealed doors and windows, pairs of eyes stared at this enormous bird. They were either excited or terrified. Luo Nan himself didn't know that this crow was a celebrity in the recycling stratum of the River Wu district. News of the great battle with Jack a month ago had spread through the ubiquitous criminal channels of this place. The residents who lived here more or less knew that a powerful and mysterious power had crushed the Jack Mafia that originally occupied this place. The main force of the mysterious power was a burly man. This was too lacking in uniqueness, so people took the initiative to choose a more legendary symbol, a large crow. The mysterious power had the special ability to control crows. Every time a crow's cry was heard, a calamity would descend, causing one's mind to go insane and fall unconscious. Jack Mafia's well-equipped sniper squad was easily defeated in this way. In the end, the mysterious power didn't take control of the recycling stratum. The territory of the Jack Mafia was divided among other powers, large and small. However, due to the free and unrestrained behavior of the mysterious power, the surrounding residents, who had been tossed and turned by the gangs for a long time, unconsciously felt a bit of reliance on the mysterious power. Perhaps the mysterious power taking control of the recycling stratum would bring about a completely different and new life. Driven by such emotions, the reappearance of the enormous crow caused a considerable portion of the residents of the recycling stratum to feel a surge of emotion. It also caused a large number of gang members, who had gathered here due to the unknown value of the scene of the incident, to tremble with fear. Luo Nan didn't understand the cause and effect, but he could feel the actual psychological effect that Ink's appearance brought to the surrounding people. If the mental state of the surrounding people could be said to be a sprinkling of magnetic sand before, then Ink, who was shuttling back and forth between the shadows of the tall buildings, was like a powerful magnet. No matter where the magnetic sand was scattered, it would stand erect, aiming the magnetic poles of the opposite direction at Ink's location. From the perspective of the living starry sky, hundreds and thousands of stars were affected by the gravitational pull of Ink's constellation. They moved in unison, incomparably uniform. At the same time, the stars that weren't affected by the magnetic force were especially eye-catching. A considerable portion of them had a corresponding uniform displacement pattern. It was just that they were incompatible with the system Luo Nan had set up. The source of some patterns could be seen with a single glance. For example, the people of Trigate Security obeyed Peony's orders and obeyed the arrangements of their superiors. They were like galaxies revolving around a binary star system. There were also some patterns that couldn't be seen. For example, the on-site personnel of the Blood Flame Order didn't even know where the big shots of the Order were. But they were members of the Blood Flame Order in the end. Their long years of activity in the Order caused an extremely subtle connection to exist between their energies and the Blood Flame Will and the First Ablatum. In the living starry sky with Luo Nan's self-format as the core and the clear order, these connections were like pedestrians that violated the traffic rules and randomly entered the flow of traffic. They brought about chaos of varying sizes, but they were clearly distinguishable. Even though the distance spanned by the connections exceeded the limits of Ink's perception and exceeded the range of the living starry sky. But when all the intruders walked in the same direction, all the connections converged in a relatively fixed region. Luo Nan was naturally able to guess. There was a dark star there that was hard to see with the naked eye. It was releasing an invisible and powerful gravitational pull. Ink circled around twice before quietly expanding its flight trajectory outward. It gradually brought the possible locations of the dark star into the range of Ink's senses. A dozen or so seconds later, a dark nebula that was hard to pry into appeared within the living starry sky. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.